Hello everyone, Gary here from Timeline Astrology. This is the forecast for April 2024. We have a lot going on this month, but before I get into each sign, I want to just highlight what sign you should be looking at in the first place. So I do use the sidereal zodiac. So if you're listening to this from a tropical perspective, then you would probably need to move your sign back one sign. That's because at present there is seen as, by most estimates, 24 degrees of a difference between the tropical placements and the sidereal placements, the fixed stars. So as I use the fixed stars, please move everything back 24 degrees. And that, again, most likely means moving back a sign. Of course, if you have your rising sign or moon sign or whatever sign you're looking at the very end of a tropical sign, it will simply then just go back to the beginning of that same sign. So before we get into each sign by sign, just a general note here of what's going on, because there's a lot going on in April. We have a new moon on April 8th, which is not just a new moon, it's also a new lunar year in the Vedic calendar. This is always used for the new year ahead, and it gives you an idea, a flavor, in essence, of what the year has in store for us. Now, of course, it's not the be all and end all. You cannot just base everything on that one chart, because there's always a lot of things to consider. And also because even though we'll have a chart on the new moon on the 8th of April, it itself moves on, like your birth chart. You have a birth chart when you're born, but then it just progresses through time and everything starts changing. But it still is traced back to your birth chart, right? So that's the same for this new moon on the April 8th. The following year is going to have a lot of different energies going on with the transits. So here it is on April 8th. This is a new moon in Pisces, sidereal Pisces, with the north node of the moon very closely conjoined the sun and moon, and therefore it's a total solar eclipse. So it's not only a new lunar year now, but it's also a solar eclipse. And so the whole year then has this flavor of change and disruption. And especially because it's Rahu eclipse, a total solar eclipse with Rahu is more disruptive. Ketu is also disruptive in a different way, but Rahu tends to shake things up in a more an intense way in many ways. Ketu is more about losses, and we have seen that play out in very obvious ways. Its current transit in Virgo is highlighting that, but it's also about unearthing things and removing things that we potentially need to get rid of. Ketu in Virgo, as an example, currently we can see major developments in health. And one of the things that I picked up on was the advancement in the treatment of HIV, the virus, and how they can now at least begin the journey of figuring out how they get this new technology into cells to remove the virus completely from a cell. So that's a very much a Ketu in Virgo kind of thing. So as you can see, eclipses are not bad always. Sometimes they deal with challenging issues and they can overcome them. They show that kind of Ketu energy that is overcoming a problem, which is what Virgo is all about. However, the other side of the zodiac, we have Rahu, which is creating many problems. And Rahu creates so many problems because we want to progress too quickly. We progress too quickly, too eagerly, and in that eagerness, we create more problems and we actually make things worse many times. And we can actually make problems where there are no problems in the first place. So Rahu is the one to keep an eye on more so in that sense. And this eclipse on the 8th of April is likely to create problems. It creates blocks. It creates like blocks in our way of thinking and literal blocks as well. It might shake things up in a bigger way. It might be massive change that happens on our planet because of this eclipse. And again, because this is starting the new year, new lunar year, this is the potential for the whole year until April 2025. So it's not just this period of April 2024. But as you can see here, the other things that are lining up during the new moon and eclipse, we have all of the planets lining up essentially in just 3 signs. If we take all of the visible planets, at least, we have Mars and Saturn coming together in Aquarius. We have Jupiter and Uranus coming together in Aries, with Mercury retrograde. They're also about to shift back into Pisces. So it's at the 0-degree mark of Aries, a real, I'd say, sensitive juncture in the zodiac where the mercurial elements, the intellect and the mind trying to process all of these changes is going to have a bit of a challenge doing so, because it feels like at a loss in a sense during this juncture. It's like a joint in time in a way between Aries and Pisces especially, but it's going backwards. So that's also a signature for the year. And again, if we place that in context, like what's going on in your life right now? What have you just begun at this time with Mercury having moved into Aries? Whatever it is, it's likely that you're having to backtrack on it. And now backtracking into the previous sign, you're really having to go back and think about things more creatively and open-minded and really think outside the box, essentially. This is a year for thinking outside the box and doing it differently. And then you see all the planets then gathered in Pisces with the new moon, with those planets either side, creating this three-sign pileup, essentially, which is in India called a Shula Yoga, which is the trident of Lord Shiva. So it's a very sharp and very incisive combination. And that can, again, be used in many good ways, as we're seeing, as I gave the example there about the HIV example, you know, the ability to kind of really get through something. But in another way, it can be just very sharp, and angry is another term we could apply to this, because actually this new moon is called Krodi in the Saturn Jupiter cycle. So there's this Jovian year concept in Indian astrology where we take the transits of Saturn and Jupiter and they repeat every 60 years. So there are 60 different years within that 60-year cycle, and each one has a different flavor, a different name. This one is called Krodi. This means angry. So now we have two indications for anger. And I would say maybe more than that, but at least two, which is the three-sign pileup, which is very much like Mars, this Shuddha Yoga, and this Krodi New Year on April 8th, which is, again, angry. The fact that Mars itself, though, is kind of like, you know, the first planet we meet in this configuration is about to meet with Saturn in its sign Aquarius. Saturn rules Aquarius traditionally. So we have this kind of angry but frustrated sense during this period, trying to push things through and then not being able to because of something that gets backed up with Mercury retrograde, as well as everything else that's going on, including, again, this eclipse sun and conjunct Rahu in Pisces with Neptune. All of that creates a lot of confusion, essentially. The silver lining here is that Venus is exalted. We might be able to, because of the bigger changes that are happening on the planet, appreciate the everyday sort of whatever's happening, the pleasures of life and the enjoyments, that they're easy to appreciate, of course. But with Venus exalted, the whole point of it is it's exalted because it's able to accept anything that's happening and go with the flow, as it said. So Venus in Pisces is more helpful. And as is, in a way, I believe, Jupiter in Aries, even though it's getting an aspect from Saturn and all of that, and it's conjoining Uranus. So it creates a lot of this kind of disturbed energy and unpredictable, unexpected events happening for sure all year, I imagine. But at the same time, it's Jupiter, Uranus, and I do think we have to imagine that as being like unexpected good news in some way. That what I get a sense of more than anything about the year ahead is that it's going to be like unexpected events that lead to a more positive situation, even if the initial situation seems quite dire. And so oftentimes that is the way it goes in life. It's always darkest before the dawn. This is an eclipse, remember. It's darkening the sun. It's always darkest before the dawn. Something is going to come out of this, but likely because something is getting quite challenging. So it has to get worse before it gets better, essentially, is what these lineups are saying. So that's the main thing in April, and I'm going to tell you now how it goes for all of the signs. So let's start with the sign Aries. So for Aries rising and or moon sign, Aries, you are ruled by Mars. So Mars year, in a sense, this Mars year, shall we call it, is important for you. And it's important, obviously, there for Aries that you don't get frustrated if you feel held back in any way, because Mars, your ruler, is conjoined Saturn for April and for this new year in your 11th sign, which is about your ambition. So you have some ambition that you want to see through, but there's some block here perhaps that you're having to negotiate, or some limitation that if you were to use the more beneficial aspect of a Saturn-Mars conjunction, which is your ability to focus, really focus on something here, then you can really start to channel this energy to make something happen. And I really believe here, and believe maybe is a better word, that for you, Aries, and for all of us in a general way, but for you, Aries, more specifically, the more open you can be with your plans in 2024 and in April especially, the more you're going to be able to make happen. Again, that's because of the eclipse in your 12th house, but it's also Mercury retrograde in your sign with Jupiter conjoining Uranus in your sign and Saturn aspecting your sign and conjunct your ruling planet Mars. All of that to say that the more open you can be and allow things and surrender to what is happening, the more likely you're going to allow things to be something that they can be. Because oftentimes what Mars does, what Aries, your sign does, is try and force things through when they're not ready to be. And in doing so, you might actually create problems where there needn't be problems, and blocks where you needn't have blocks, and issues where they just didn't have to exist if you just to allow things to be more. So that's basically it in a nutshell for you, Aries. It's about letting go of something at this point so that it can be something else. And by doing that, you'll actually be able to make more happen. And it sounds, and it might even feel like very contradictory to you, but the sooner you can get on board with that, the easier your life will be in 2024. So that's the new moon on the 8th of April. It's in your 12th sign, so it's all about surrender. Venus is there in your 12th sign, so it's offering you the ability to surrender. There might be some issues with your partner or with money or with family, and there's something that you have to let go of here. There's some dynamic perhaps or something or someone that you have to let go of. Or there's something you have to change in terms of your relationship dynamic. But you can, and this is suggesting that you can do that. Now, obviously, the thing to be mindful of here in terms of the 12th house is if you were to overdo the spending side of the 12th house. So expenditure can certainly increase for the year because of this new moon and Rahu conjoined here. And so Rahu tends to increase, exaggerate, distort perceptions. So to keep that in perspective as well. So just be mindful of your spending. Long distance travel perhaps is another thing to be mindful of, being mindful of wanting to kind of just tune out of what's going on in the world and not deal with problems. That's Rahu in the 12th, Ketu in the 6th. So if there's an issue that's come up or a debt that you have to deal with or a problem you have to deal with or a day-to-day issue, that's 6th house, to make sure that you're not just completely avoiding the issues in the 12th house and using the 12th house for what it's best for, which is to surrender to what is. And surrendering to what is isn't necessarily accepting it every moment, that's how it's going to be from now on, because surrendering to what is means going with the flow, which is constantly changing. So it's always changing anyway. So if you feel frustrated about how things are right now, it won't be long before it's changed, in other words. So that's the new moon on the 8th of April. Let's move it forward. You can see the day after the new moon, Mercury will have moved back into your 12th sign. Now, this is a mixed bag because it's no longer in your sign retrograde, but now it's in your 12th sign retrograde. So there might be some confusion here. The mixed bag is that it's a kind of a double negative when you have Mercury retrograde in debilitation. It behaves as if it's kind of in exaltation in a way, but it's still in your 12th house. There's no denying that Mercury is now retrograde in your 12th house. It rules your 3rd and 6th. It's very much about communication and day-to-day life and willfulness and effort and being more enterprising, and travel is another indication here. So obviously this indicates that you have to be really mindful in April of all of these: travel, communication, whatever you're trying to force through at this point. If you're not surrendering your will at this point, your will be surrendered at some point. And in a way, you might say that actually we have no choice but to surrender ultimately, and that you can't just decide to surrender. It's just something that happens and you just give up. But I would say don't give up, but just surrender and allow. And that's the extreme in a way from Aries to Pisces when we're talking about a planet moving back from Aries to Pisces. You just push and push and push and push. That's Aries. And then eventually you realize that I have to surrender this thing. That's Pisces. So this is the journey now in April because of Mercury retrograde. And it continues to retrograde and conjoin Rahu by the time it stations on the 25th. And as this occurs, we have, first of all, a couple of things that are helpful here. One is, the first thing is on the 13th, 14th of April, the sun moves into your sign. Mars is moving past Saturn now, so right up to that 10th of April period might feel very frustrating, but then something might open up for you at this point. So you can see here, Mars is at 23 degrees already, and by the middle of the month, the sun now has moved into your sign. This is more invigorating for you, Aries. This is probably going to feel more, confident. You're going to feel more energy. And again, Mars getting away from Saturn now is going to feel better overall. So things are opening up, but it's still not very clear about the details. So here we come to the full moon now, and you can see the moon waxing, and then we have this full moon on the 24th. It's at 10 degrees of Libra, so the full moon is opposite the sun in your sign, exalted. So here we have, and together with a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at this time, there's something surprising here. There's something, again, I think surprisingly good, perhaps. But this full moon in your seventh sign is about finding a balance with not just other people, with your partner, but also with yourself, to negotiate with yourself, to try not to be too hard on yourself, to kind of let yourself off the hook for a while for this full moon on the 24th. So you can see here as well, at that time, Mars moves into Pisces. Your ruler on this full moon is going into Pisces and actually aspects this full moon. But at any rate, Mars in the 12th house is a lot more about letting go. I mean, the whole month is starting out with a flavor of letting go, surrendering. It just becomes more and more the case that you eventually do anyway. So why not get on board with it from the get-go, I would say, and don't frustrate yourself in trying to push things through prematurely. Mars in Pisces in the 12th house, generally for you, Aries, is a time to be really mindful of getting frustrated when things aren't very clear or where things are going aren't clear. Mars in Pisces, especially when it conjoins Neptune, which it will do by exact degree on the 29th of the month, is just not very, clear. Neptune makes things a bit blurry. In the 12th house, Pisces, even more so. So your energy might be better now because it's kind of freed up from Saturn, but at the same time, you just might not know where to put that energy. And so this is probably better expressed in kind of going on a retreat, going on a long distance travel trip. Again, be mindful, I suppose, of Mercury retrograde up until the 25th of April, and then maybe think about that afterwards as a kind of freeing up of that energy again, and travel plans can open up by the end of April. But again, you might just not feel very confident or directed, even if you have a lot of energy now, which you should, in where you're going to put that energy. And that Mars is a bit like swimming around in the ocean of possibility, but it's like, I know everything is possible, but what am I going to focus on here? So you might not feel very focused at this time, especially with Mars and Neptune conjoined. So that's how the month is going to end. It just ends with this sort of sense of anything is possible now because everything has been shaken up. Everything I thought I knew was it's kind of like, oh, it's not that way anymore. Okay, so that didn't work out. Okay, then maybe I can do something else. And there's a great sense of possibility of potential by the end of April as a result. So Aries, that is it for the month of April. I wish you all the best, and until next time. For Taurus rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Taurus, the good news is that your ruling planet Venus is moving into Pisces from the beginning of April. And this is where it is exalted. So your ruling planet exalted feels so much better. And, to feel better at this time is to feel good about the changes that are happening, because there obviously are a lot of changes happening with everything that's going on with the eclipse on the 8th of April, with the Mercury retrograde, with the conjunctions, the Mars, Saturn, the Jupiter, Uranus. There's a lot happening and there's a lot to think about and to figure out. And what Venus in Pisces is best suited to, though, is to not overthink things and actually to allow things to be more and to just go with the flow, in essence. So Venus in Pisces in your 11th sign, and especially because, it's your ruler, but also your sixth lord, it's about letting go of any struggle here and just going with the flow in order for you to get what you want. Because the 11th sign is actually about your higher ambitions. 11th sign is also about your desires, whether it's sensual desire or any kind of pleasurable, enjoyable desire, or your friends and any kind of ambition you have in any general sort of way. So there's a sense in a way, Taurus, that going with the flow is going to help you get what you want in the end. And even though, again, there's a lot of changes, essentially, without going with the flow, you're not going to be able to make the most of them. And so this Venus exaltation at this time in particular with this eclipse and everything else that's going on is such an important time. So here I'll show you the eclipse on the 8th of April. First of all, this is an eclipse in your 11th host sign where it's all about your ambitions and your desires and your bigger ambitions more than anything else. And the fact that we have, Rahu conjunct the sun and moon, so a total solar eclipse during this period shows that you're obviously working with some sort of ambition here, doing something that feels right to you. This is another thing about Venus and in Pisces especially. It's kind of go with the good feeling vibe, essentially, Taurus. I mean, if you feel anything is appropriate at all, I mean, you might say that is always the case. Go with what feels good, right? Because there's so much happening that you might get confused about what you should do. And especially, with Mercury retrograde as well, and it will return into Pisces the day after the eclipse in Pisces. There's a lot obviously that you have to work out in a way at this time. So, don't necessarily be on it in terms of, oh, I need to be clear about all the details straight away, but go with a good feeling vibe, like what feels good, what feels right as well. Um, and I know that might be confusing because everything is changing as well. There's so much change going on with even just Jupiter as well, conjunct Uranus in your 12th sign. We got Mars, Saturn conjunct in your 10th sign, Saturn aspecting the planets in your 12th. There's a lot you have to surrender here with the 10th house being very much about taking action and Saturn, Mars combined, can be a bit frustrating. So you might be dealing with some frustration in terms of some relationship you're having. Maybe it's a work thing, maybe it's a private thing. It could be either because of Mars ruling your 7th house and your 10th house, conjunct Saturn, the 10th house ruler. Saturn is really winning out in this case and, might, make you take a step back a bit more as well. It makes you maybe more detached with this person, with this situation. But itself, again, that is important to kind of find a balance with, that you don't kind of go all in on one side, that you don't burn your bridges essentially at this time because of Saturn Mars. But again, because of all of that activity in your 11th and 12th house, there's a need to negotiate now, what are you getting out of a situation with somebody or with any kind of work situation or a personal situation. And, to negotiate with them, instead of, again, trying to burn your bridges. And the fact as well that Mercury, which on the day after the eclipse moves back into Pisces from the 12th of surrendering and letting go back into the 11th and to kind of visit what it is that I want in the first place. Like, it's all very well to say, okay, I'm just going to let this go and let it slide and that's it, and there's just, I'm not saying to let it go in terms of ignore if someone is behaving badly or something is not right. But I'm saying to let it go, to allow it to be more and to not try and pin it down so much. But then when you do that, then it's like, well, okay, but then I need to figure out what it is I want then. Like if this isn't working out the way I thought it would, what do I actually want? And that's why I'm saying it might be better to kind of go with the sense of what is right for you or what feels good more so. And feeling good, I guess, is the kind of silver lining here within all of these kinds of alignments. There's quite challenging alignments here with Saturn, Mars, to say the least, but also a total solar eclipse on the 8th. The fact that, Venus is exalted at the same time is like, okay, the silver lining is, you can feel good even if something isn't right or doesn't feel right or it's changing a lot. So I just want to go back to the eclipse though on the 8th because it's such an important reset, not just this month, but all year. And all of the energies of this time are included really in the year ahead until April 2025. So again, to think about your higher ambitions and what you want out of life, think about, what makes you happy. The sun is your fourth lord. The moon is your third lord. It's very much about going for something that you want when they conjoin in your 11th house. This happens, every year, of course, for the new moon in Pisces. But in this case, because it's a total solar eclipse, you know, just stay open-minded about it. Like there could be something that you really want, but then you don't have all of the details. You're not familiar with all of the situation as yet. but you will become clear about it eventually, or you'll have some insight, or something will be revealed to you during perhaps this eclipse or soon after, or maybe it already has. It really depends as well where the planets are situated in your chart. Are they before or after the eclipse degree? By the way, the eclipse degree is at 25 degrees, so this is something to keep an eye on. If you have planets around here, that's definitely a part of your chart as well that will be changing, apart from the general sense of the 11th house and the ambitions. So that I kind of give to you here, but if you can just have a sense of what is getting triggered, if there's anything here by sign, or in especially this 25-degree mark, Pisces. So as we move it forward, then, as I said, then Mercury goes back into Pisces and sort of starts recalibrating everything and trying to figure everything out. And let's get clear about the details. But again, it's not clear about the details at all. And as the moon continues to wax up to the full moon in Libra, your sixth house sign, that occurs on the 24th, there will be this sense of things coming to a culmination in many ways, and resolution after that new moon. The full moon is always this kind of extreme end of the other end of the cycle, where something needs to be resolved or released and let go of in another way. Now, the fact that the new moon itself is in Pisces, which is about letting go, but now this full moon in Libra in your sixth sign is about, okay, I need to figure something out here, but I need to also resolve something. Right. And if you don't have all of the facts as yet, which is likely the case with Mercury continuing to retrograde until the 25th and conjoined Rahu here, even if you don't have all the facts and you're not really clear about how to move forward 100%, it's okay that you can just get a sense of what is the right thing to do and what needs to be resolved so that you can move on. The fact that it's a full moon in your sixth house suggests some sort of resolution around conflict. And even though Taurus, you're not necessarily somebody who enjoys conflict, because your, sixth house ruler is Venus. So you just don't like conflict, but that's doesn't mean that you can't resolve it peacefully. So this is the time, I think, to resolve that conflict peacefully. You can see here the sun has moved into Aries, into exaltation from the 14th of April. And so the sun exalted in your 12th house is about, again, surrendering something in terms of maybe the home situation, some happiness that can be gained more so by, again, surrendering, and to be more giving and to be more sacrificial in a way without being a doormat, right? That's the 12th house. The sun in the 12th house can sometimes be a doormat, and it's important that you don't do that because the sun is exalted. So you really need to tune into what it is that's, right for you and everybody else. And again, this full moon on the 24th of April, as Mercury begins to station now as well, is the time to resolve a lot of these conflicts within yourself. And once you do that, of course, all the conflicts are worked out with other people. It's unlikely that you're going to resolve conflicts with other people if you're withholding something. And so it's about resolving this inner conflict essentially for this period so that you can then resolve them with others. Then Mercury, as I said, on the 25th was stationed direct conjunct Rahu. So there's something to work out still, and it's not 100% clear, but at least Mercury's moving forward now. And then we can see here Mars is going to conjoin Neptune. It's moved in on the full moon on the 24th or thereabouts. Mars moves into Pisces. That's a better situation for relationships as well. And so it does suggest that after the full moon on the 24th of April, with Mars then moving into Pisces, that there is some sort of resolution here or some negotiation that can take place and ending some conflict. And that this will be a better situation in your relationships after the 25th of April. However, there's also the thing about Mars itself in Pisces conjunct Neptune. And so there might be a lack of clarity around your relationships. This could be a partner or friends. So socializing at this time might be a bit confusing. Or people might be confused about, your intentions as well. This is the thing about the 11th house. It's very much about what you want. But Mars in the 11th in Pisces is not very clear about what it wants. And Mars in the 11th conjunct Neptune and Rahu and Mercury all there, it's definitely not clear about what it wants. So if you're not clear about what you want, or the other person isn't, or you're dealing with some situation that's just not very clear right now, again, think back to the full moon on the 24th and the conflict resolution that occurred, and hone in on that more so, and then allow things to work themselves out, because that's the more important thing. The details will get figured out in the long run. At least Mars is not constrained now by Saturn, so there's not this frustration that can be there. It's just maybe this lack of clarity about where to really focus your energy. and what to do, essentially. Jupiter has conjoined Uranus around this time as well, you know, a week before this on the 20th. So that itself leads to surprises that you have to be open to. And in the 12th house, the only way you can be open to that is to be really still. 12th house is already very hidden. It's the subconscious. So it can come out in dreams. It can come out in different ways when you're kind of daydreaming even. But oftentimes it doesn't come out at all necessarily, very obviously. But yet there's still some sort of surprise that might happen here at this stage. Again, because it's the ruler of the 11th house, it's very much about your desires and your ambitions in life and your friendships and your relationships. All of those things are going to be impacted with all of these planets having gathered in Pisces throughout the month of April. So an interesting month, as you can see, Taurus, as it is for everybody, but to be able to navigate this with ease, with poise, with grace, I think is possible, as long as, again, you are open to the changes, the many changes that are happening in April. Okay, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best, and until next time. For Gemini rising and or moon sign for April 2024, Gemini, your ruler Mercury is about to station on the 1st of the month and will continue to retrograde until the 25th, when it will then station direct with Rahu, the North Node in Pisces, in your 10th house. It's going to start, though, in your 11th house, which is very much about what you gain from what you're doing, from either work or anything you do. And it's going to go back into your 10th house and get you to really focus on what it is you're doing. So work-related issues are going to be a very prominent theme for you in April, Gemini. And to be really open-minded and patient and to think outside the box and try not to pin it down as yet, I think would be good advice, because things are all over the place. Everything is up in the air. Everything's changing, whether subtly or obviously in your life, it's all up for change. So that is because of Mercury retrograde, for sure. But more importantly, because of Mercury's retrograde combined with the eclipse, a total solar eclipse in your 10th house of action, of work, career, and also the conjunctions of Mars and Saturn on the one side, and then Jupiter and Uranus on the other. Jupiter, the ruler of your 10th house of relationships and career. So everything feels as sort of like it's coming to a head, and like everything is bottlenecked into this period. And so work-related issues, I think, would be particularly sort of where you'll feel this. But I think it's going to be felt everywhere. Like all of the planets are involved in this 3-sign pileup by the beginning of April, and everything might feel forced, like feel strained in a way. But at the same time, if you keep an open mind and allow things to kind of just funnel their way through, then everything can come out in the end, and everything will come out in the end anyway, whether you force it through or whether it feels forced or whether it's premature or whatever it might feel like. It's all happening as it should. But it's just obviously to make this an easier process for you of change, which is essentially what Mercury retrograde and eclipses and everything means here, is that there's big changes happening. And again, like I said, more especially in your work life. It is also affecting your home life as well, though, because of course everything has a knock-on effect. And because for you, Gemini, and Mercury ruling your 4th house along with your sign, every time it retrogrades, of course, it is about your happiness. It's about your being at home in your bones, in a sense. You know, where am I happiest? Where do I find my happiness? It's important to look at where Mercury is going all the time for you, to notice, you know, what makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy. And this is a process you're going through all the time when Mercury retrogrades. Does it 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time, sometimes more. So it's kind of like going in and out of this process all the time, really, or at least half the year. So this time it's about, again, very much about what is it in terms of what I'm doing in the world out there, my career perhaps, or whatever it is I'm doing, and what am I getting out of it, and who am I doing it with, and do I want to be with this person? Do I want to engage with this group, for example, the 11th house? And, you know, initially it might feel like, because Mercury's now in Aries in the 11th from the beginning of the month, but then stations, it might feel like, okay, I want to do this with these people, with this group. But then it starts to backtrack. And then there's kind of not very clear about things, or you might not have communicated that clearly what you want, and they're not clear about what you want because they're also not figuring out what they want. So nobody's really clear about what they want because everyone is thinking intensely about a lot of different things. So you come together in a group situation, if you are, that could potentially lead to a lot of confusion within a group because everybody's very mentally busy at this time in April. And it's very hard to be very clear in our communications with other people when everyone's so busy. You can be as deliberate and as focused and attentive to what you're saying as you want. The other person will not necessarily pick you up in that way that you meant. Commonplace misinterpretations are commonplace in this period of Mercury retrogrades, right? So just to think about this in terms of keeping an open mind about how you're communicating what you want. Think more about what I feel is right. What do I feel I want? What would make me happy in this moment? What do I need to do, and who do I need to do it with? So I'll bring you up to the new moon on the 8th, because that's really the important reset point in the whole year, not just in the month. It's a new month, a new lunar month, but it's also a new lunar year in the Vedic calendar, the 8th of April. So this is an important time for sure to really be, I'd say, mindful and open-minded at the same time. And, you might say, well, actually, those go hand in hand. Being mindful and open-minded are, two sides of the same coin. But in another way, because of Rahu here and Mercury going back into the sign that Rahu creates this total solar eclipse on April 8th, you really need to keep an open mind and think creatively about things, really think outside the box. It will benefit you. It's almost like everything's coming to a head by the new moon. Everything gets reset on 8th of April, and then Mercury goes back into Pisces, and then, okay, it's not the way I thought it was. Let's do it this way. Let's be open to how we do it in the future, shall we? And let's just keep an open mind throughout. And it's almost like it might offer solutions that you hadn't thought of before if you just allow things to be a bit more. Now, obviously, this has major impact on your work life. So to be really mindful of your relationships at work, but to be mindful of your relationships in general, and also your social networks, and thinking about all these things, I would say, without getting too obsessed about them. That's the other thing that Rahu can sometimes do. It like makes us obsessed about things. So if there's a situation at work that is not working out, try not to obsess about it. Try to gain a different perspective during the eclipse. Try to see things differently, or just quieten the mind so that you can be open to doing it a different way. And then you'll find a solution that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. It would be so easy to get lost in all of the details here and not be clear about anything, and to make things worse in a sense. Even though in the grand scheme of things, it's all happening perfectly, sometimes it doesn't feel that way. This is the key thing here. It might not feel that way. So this new moon in Pisces with Rahu and all of that, and all the planets either side, Saturn, Mars especially, feeling frustrated and angry, and wanting to push something through and it's not clear. So again, it could be around groups of people or friends, and especially co-workers, because this is the 6th Lord and the 11th Lord, conjunct Saturn. And it's on one side of the 10th house with Jupiter and Uranus conjunct on the other in Aries itself, in Mars' sign. You could see that there could be a potential sort of coming to a head here when you're dealing with groups of people, either again, work related or even social events. So again, just keep an open mind. It's all going to work itself out in the end anyway, so you'd be better off just kind of letting it slide for now. So that's the new moon. The day after the new moon, Mercury goes back into Pisces. This is like a double negative in a way. You can see here Mars, Saturn are exactly conjoined as well. But Mercury retrograde in Pisces is a bit like it's trying to come out of its debilitation, and as if it were in Virgo, exalted. So there is strength here as well. And I do think this reflects the ability, after everything's been churned up and shook up and changed, that you're more likely going to think outside the box at this point. And I think after the 8th of April, solutions to problems can come more easily. And, I think this is like a double negative in many ways. It's double negative because Mercury's retrograde, as if exalted, but it's also conjoined Venus, which is exalted. So Mercury actually gets propped up in the whole situation here. What gets kind of pulled down in that situation actually is Venus, so that's a different matter. But Mercury, your ruler, is now like it's behaving as if it's exalted, essentially. And it could be the high of the change that's happening. You might feel the high. Something could have got worked out, in your work life or social life. And now it's like, okay, I feel on a high. But just be mindful, because the high might be just that. It just might feel like a high that isn't real. This is the thing to be mindful of. And when the kind of high ends, which will happen on the 25th of April with Mercury conjunct Rahu, it just might feel like a come down, or it's almost like it's too stimulating, this Mercury in Pisces with Rahu. It's just all too stimulating. And again, just be mindful with work relationships and personal relationships, I would say. So then as the moon continues to wax throughout the month until the full moon on the 24th, when at that stage Mars breaks up with Saturn and gets loose, gets free of Saturn, and then moves into Pisces. This is a more, I would say, beneficial in some ways because Mars is no longer constrained by Saturn, but in another way, Mars is now let loose in Pisces, where again, all of this action is happening for you at work. So I would say to keep an open mind about this too, because Mars now is conjunct Neptune as well in the coming days by the end of April. This is a time to be open-minded about, what you're doing. And again, especially work-related issues, sixth house Lord in the 10th, but also friends, the 11th Lord. Mars is for you a bit of a tricky planet. And so with Neptune, things might not be clear. Either people are not being clear with you, or you're not being very clear about what your own energy is doing. And it could be all over the place, your energy, essentially. So just be mindful, I would say, of the benefit of Mars in Pisces, which is being open to doing, things differently, but also just be open because Mars has got more energy now, at least. It might be scattered and all over the place, and it's not as constrained as it was, but at least you got more energy, right? And so you might be able to deal with these things better. But again, the downside of it is, especially when you deal with work-related issues and social life, that it's all over the place. The energy is very scattered here, and you might feel that up and down of your energy. So it might be hard to direct your goal-orientated sort of willful self into doing something that's very clear when you're not really clear and no one around you is very clear. So try not to get frustrated with other people either around you. You can see here, this is a full moon. It's on the 24th and it's in Libra, your fifth house sign. It now shows that Sun is exalted in your 11th with Jupiter and Uranus. This is more optimistic, I would say, maybe overly optimistic, even like maybe biting off more than you can chew in terms of social life. So just be mindful of the end of April being very busy socially, with the full moon in your fifth being very enjoyable, I would say. But there's obviously, as always, with a full moon, a need to find balance between your social life and your enjoyments and your private life and your kind of going out and meeting friends versus wanting to stay home and enjoy someone's company privately, kind of thing. There's definitely a lot to juggle here. And with the Mercury ongoing retrograde, and it continues to 25th when it then conjuncts Rahu in your 10th house, it feels exciting when Mercury starts to move forward again. And when it does so conjunct Rahu, it's excited, but you could also say fearful, because one person's excitement is another person's fear, you might say. Excitement feels like fear in the body. So because of Mars as well, conjunct Neptune at this time and into the end of the month and into, of course, May, then, it could be the fear of just not being very clear about what's happening and what to do or where to put your energy and focus. And that sense of that anything is possible itself, though, feels exciting. It could also feel like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty that hangs in the air by the end of April, even if it feels exciting, is what I'm saying. So then by the end of the month here, you can see that Mars and Neptune by the 29th are exactly conjoined. And this is, again, potentially confusing. That's all I would say about it. But again, at least Mercury's moving forward. At least you can have this sense of planning ahead now, even if you're not really sure about where you're going or what you're doing. And because you cannot be, because there's so many things changing, at least they're changing, it seems, in more positive ways at this point. So that's the thing to hold on to, I would say, Gemini, throughout the month of April, and all of the changes that are happening, to kind of keep your eye on the end of the month, keep your eye on the ball, as it were, on the bigger picture, on the horizon, and know that you are ultimately going to get to where you need to be, even if the details aren't really clear right now, and certainly from the beginning of April. Okay, Gemini, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Cancer rising and or moon sign for April 2024, Cancer, your ruler, the moon, is about to create a total solar eclipse on the 8th of April. So here we can see from the 1st of April, Mercury is stationing and about to move retrograde from the 1st, and we'll go back into Pisces where it will conjoin the North Node, Rahu, the eclipse. It's a total solar eclipse on the 8th. So everything is changing in the first week of April, essentially. And it's all kind of pivoting into this 9th house in your chart, Cancer. So the 9th house is obviously very active at this time. All the planets are either in or either side of the 9th house. So everything is kind of coming to a head here. And it might feel like things are bottlenecked in a way. But in another way, I think there's a great potential here for opening your mind to different ways of thinking about things and communicating something that you might not even have, believed before even. If you think about how often we might say things that we don't necessarily think long and deep about, but we just repeat them over and over, or they've been repeated to us, and then we take them on board as a belief system. But the 9th house opposite the 3rd house also, which is very much about thinking and believing, thinking the 3rd house, 9th house believing. If we just keep repeating things over and over again, we end up believing it, that's for sure. But sometimes we have to question what it is that we believe. And maybe that starts with communicating something differently. And this is what these eclipses suggest for you. The eclipse has already occurred in your 3rd house in the sign Virgo with Ketu, the south node, removing something that needs to be removed at this point. So again, communicating something that just is not really true even, but certainly maybe not helpful to anyone concerned, and certainly not yourself. So there could be something to remove here, and that eventually and will subsequently basically change what you believe is possible even. So it's almost like having to say to yourself over and over again, something to say, to sense it out. Like, is this true? If I say this, if I really think about this, or I really feel this out, is it true that when I say this? So, and the reason why I say all of this, of course, again, is because of a total solar eclipse in your 9th house, Pisces, with Rahu, Sun and Moon, of course, and all the planets here are either side. Saturn and Mars have come together on one side, Jupiter and Uranus are on the other, Mercury's retrograde. And so there's a lot to work out here. And again, if you can keep an open mind about what is possible, because Pisces is about everything being possible, anything is possible in Pisces. At the same time, if you can kind of channel this energy and funnel it into sort of a kind of clear way of doing things or thinking about things, at least initially. I mean, you don't even have to get clear about how you're going to do it really in April, because that's going to work itself out anyway, subsequently. But what's more important in April, I think, is about being clear about what you believe is possible, because what you believe is possible is likely what's going to happen eventually anyway. So that, I think, is the more important piece of this for you, Cancer, in April. The 8th of April, the total solar eclipse, is an important juncture in the month, but also the year. It's not just a new lunar year, it's a new lunar month. It's a new lunar year. The next year, up until April 2025, is what we're seeing now with this eclipse. All of the energies combined in this period on the 8th of April is imbibed in the year, and it's going to really color the year. And so this Saturn Mars is one part of that. The maybe conflict that's going on with you and your partner. There's some issue here around your partner, maybe also children involved in that. Work, children, and partner and finances are 3 major issues going on here because of Saturn and Mars coming together in your 8th. So even if you don't have children, there likely is something that you want, that you're planning, but there's something that you have to deal with, negotiate with somebody else. Even if you don't have a child, or even if you don't have a partner, there's still something you're trying to negotiate with someone else in a professional context, for example. You want to plan this thing, but you have to negotiate with the other person in a sort of business arrangement to tease out all the details. Now, again, that's what's going on with the Saturn Mars, but because Mercury's retrograde in Mars's sign and Jupiter Uranus are conjoining, there are too many things hanging up in the air. It's like everything's been thrown up into a kind of, everything's in a spin essentially at this time. So it would be very difficult to sort of pin anything down essentially in April. So instead, Cancer, if you can just keep an open mind about what you're doing now and who you're doing it with and why you're doing it, and more especially, I would say more than anything, is the why. Not even the what or the who, but the why. The what is you know, obviously the 10th house is the action that you take subsequently. And you only take action because you believe it to be the thing to do, which is the 9th house. But the house before the 9th house is the 8th, which is about being open to your plans with other people and negotiate with other people. And that's the who. So in between the who and the what is the why, the 9th house, the eclipse, asking you to be really open-minded about why you do anything. And then subsequently, Mercury retrogrades back into your 9th house from the 9th, and then until the 25th is going to continue to retrograde, really asking you to really think about why you're doing anything. And, you know, it's not the time necessarily to be really definitive about anything. And I think it's a better time to really kind of keep an open mind about what is possible here, because there's so much that is possible. And the only way that something is possible that you hadn't even thought of before is if you keep an open mind about it. These configurations, the Mercury retrograde in Pisces alone with Rahu and all of that, and Pisces is where, you know, Mercury struggles a bit, but it's propped up an awful lot by being retrograde and being with Venus. So it's like, yeah, I can see things differently now. I can think about things differently. And this is now what's happening. Okay, so let me be a bit more open-minded about it. I didn't think that was possible. Now this is possible. Okay, so you can see how it's just basically leading to this kind of period of the more open you can be, the more open-minded you can be, the more you're likely to benefit from this whole period. And the more you try to focus and pinpoint something and get it kind of, okay, I need to get it down on paper, the less likely this is going to work out in your favor, because it's all up in the air yet. So if you think that you can get someone to pin something down for you at this time, they might try and pin it down for you, but it's actually like trying to pin down a butterfly. It's not going to work because the butterfly needs to do the butterfly thing. This is like a very sort of butterfly type of month. Everything is sort of just moving around all over the place. And so it's not a month to pin something down. It's a month to be open-minded. And then subsequently, you can pin it down with details. Subsequently, in May, especially when Mercury goes back into Aries, into your 10th house, you can then get on board with what you had started in March. But because Mercury is not moving forward in April, it's going back a sign actually into your 9th sign. It's again asking you to go back to the drawing board. It's not clear yet. So let me bring it forward, because as the month progresses, then we see Mars is going to move into your 9th sign. Sun goes into your 10th sign. These are better configurations, essentially. Leading up to the full moon on the 24th, we have Mars now in your 9th, Sun exalted in your 10th, much better position. Sun Jupiter is like, the only downside of this would be maybe just over exuberance and taking on too much and being super confident, like overly confident, perhaps. Because again, with Uranus conjunct Jupiter, there's like unexpected twists and turns going on at work, perhaps, or something that you're doing is just showing different results than you expected, that kind of thing. But again, I think it is a much more confident time, even with Saturn's aspect, you know, keeping kind of lid on things. That's not a bad thing. Mars, on the other hand, in Pisces, conjunct Neptune and Rahu, especially, it will conjoin Neptune by the end of April. And then into May, conjunct Rahu. The energy is all over the place. And so if you have children, that could be one thing. It's also work related for you. So any kind of dealing with, you know, work related issues or children, like trying to get the balance right in all of these things, your energy might be all over the place and it'd be very hard to kind of pin it down. And it's, again, not the month to pin anything down. Mars in Pisces is like, I think even more than the other planets in a way, even though Mercury again might be challenged more so to kind of pin something down and be very clear. Mars in Pisces is less clear in terms of it's not as directed as it likes to be. Mars likes to be really directed from A to B. In Pisces, there's no A to B. There's like floating around aimlessly so many times. However, it is still more beneficial than being conjoined Saturn, where it's too focused and too restricted in what it can do. Mars in Pisces is like energy is kind of all over the place, but at least I've got energy. You know, it comes in spurts, but okay, I've got energy. I don't know what to do with my energy, but at least I've got energy, that kind of thing. So not being clear about what you believe, again, is the key core issue here for you, Cancer. And to be open-minded about what you believe, because if you close your mind at this point to other possibilities that are presenting themselves now, you're going to miss an opportunity to do things a different way. And the only way you can do things differently is if you can believe that they're going to give you different results. Again, belief is the ninth house and action is the 10th house. These are all of the houses that are really being impacted strongly by the end of the month. So a complicated month for sure in April, but it's the same for all signs. The fact that you are ruled by the moon, which is involved in the eclipse, eclipsing your sun in your ninth house, I think there's a lot that you have to negotiate here with in terms of, very personal things as well as more professional things. And getting all the balance right here can sometimes feel a challenge, but I think you can do it, like everybody can do it. And with more awareness, I hope this has given you some awareness of what's going on in April. And of course, as always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Leo rising and or moon sign for April 2024, Leo, of course, the sun is your ruler, the sun, which is about to become totally eclipsed in your eighth house sign, is the whole issue here. So the point about Leo and the sense of surety and assuredness and confidence in anything that you're doing, anything that you're about, is obviously under question here, because when you have an eclipse in your eighth house, with the sun in your eighth now in Pisces, and everything else drawn into the mix in a way, in one way or the other, every element of your life and being is sort of drawn into this changing circumstance here. Obviously, this eclipse shows change. That's quite obvious. But what changes is a deep sense of, what you're about when you have Leo rising, even moon sign, but certainly rising sign, where it's like everything in your life, every aspect of your life goes through so much change. It still happens with the moon, but the moon is more about how you feel about these things that might not necessarily correlate with big changes that are happening everywhere. But in a way, for everybody in some way, because of all the planets gathering with this eclipse, everything is up for change in another way. And I know that sounds really dramatic to say that, because you're like, well, it's obviously not going to change everything for everyone. Of course not. But in a way, it is also. In a way, it is a subtle thing. It's like when something big changes in the world, all of us are changed. It affects everybody. It's not just like a certain sector or a certain country. We're all connected. So we all have to be mindful of this change that we're all going through. But for you, Leo, of course, it means that you are going through some personal changes. It's the eighth house where the eclipse occurs. So it is just about that. And even the fact that when you consider the moon in Leo, if the moon were here, then the moon in the eighth from the eighth is itself a couple of days every month that you have to be more mindful of, maybe feeling more challenged emotionally and mentally, having to kind of just maybe take a step back from your emotional and mental, uh, you know, processes that might feel more intense around that eighth house theme. And so moon and eighth house just don't go together in a way, in many ways, because it's about kind of thinking the worst essentially as well. And obviously when changes happen, sometimes we can sort of catastrophize over, oh, if this has happened now, what else could happen? And so on and so on. This is why anytime the moon is in Pisces for a moon in Leo individual, if you're born when the moon in Leo, that 2.5 days that the moon is in Pisces every month is just 2.5 days to be really mindful and slow and meditate more and just care for yourself a bit more. The fact that this now though is an eclipse, so it's the moon and the sun, your ruler, and the moon eclipsing the sun, your ruler, your 12th lord eclipsing your lord, is where the mind can really become distorted. And when you put Rahu into the mix very closely conjunct the sun and moon, there's a real big chance here, Leo, of you distorting something in your mind. And whatever that might be, because it could be a lot of different things because of all of the planets implicated. The real issue is your mind distorting reality, essentially, because the 12th house moon is conjoined or eclipsing your Lord, the sun, in the eighth house, and the 12th and the eighth house are all very much hidden aspects, like really deep psychological issues. So was probably a better time, I would say, to heal some things, to unearth things, to reveal things, to allow things to come up from your subconscious, while also being mindful that perhaps these insights, quote unquote, revelations could also be distortions, right? And to know which is which, like how do you know which is which? How do I know that this is not a distortion that my mind has dreamt up? like coming out of a deep sleep and coming out of a dream state and coming out into conscious awareness. This, what was that dream about, you know, and trying to make sense of it. How do you know what's real and what's not real, essentially? Because this is an eclipse in Pisces and it's conjunct Neptune also. And Venus, your 10th Lord, is there, and third Lord, which is very much about making sense of things and doing something about it. And there's just no clarity around this. And then you add in Mercury, a retrograde after this, and there's just no sense of clarity around these issues at this time. There could be a lot of eighth house issues in a practical sense that you're having to negotiate with, whether it's joint finances or issues with your partner, whether it's family issues in terms of money issues, whether it's values in terms of valuables and assets, literally your partner's assets, maybe some issues that crop up around these things, inheritances and loans and debts and things like that, or just obstacles in life that might crop up right now. That again, what is the revelation and what is the distortion? It might be hard to tell which is which. And that's why it will be really important to sit still with it on the 8th of April for this eclipse. So let me show you that first of all, as everything lines up. This is the 1st of April, you can see on screen. And then by the 5th, 6th, and into the 7th, we have the moon conjoined Saturn and Mars, which are really pulling closely together by this time. And by the 10th of April, they will be exact. This is important because it really brings these two together in your 7th house, opposite your sign, into some sort of conflicted situation, perhaps, and it might be frustrating. You might have to deal with some frustration at home. There might be some issues with partner at home or with travel. If you're traveling at this time, I would say be really mindful in April of frustrations, of setbacks, of things not working out exactly as you maybe planned them to, or just being frustrated in some way. That's Mars Saturn. So just be mindful of that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't travel. It just means that being mindful. Now, if you are traveling, just be mindful also of Mercury retrograde, especially starting out as retrograde in the 9th house on the 1st of April and then moving back on the 9th of April to Pisces. So the 1st of April seems to be a bit more complicated as everything kind of gets backed up and changes direction. The end of April may be more helpful in that there's still complications, but maybe it's kind of already done its thing. And then after the eclipse on April 8th, you know, you can step back and do, you know, take a time out here, essentially, maybe. And that's probably a good thing. Now, for those who are traveling from the beginning of April, again, I'm highlighting that because of the 9th house Mercury retrograde from the 1st of April. Well, yeah, you might go on a trip and then it kind of gets delayed, or then something happens and then it's something that you didn't imagine it would be. And then it's eventually that you settle down into that and just retreat into that space more and allow that to be. The silver lining here, of course, is that this is the eclipse here on the 8th. The silver lining is that Venus is exalted during this period. And so there might be an ability here to kind of just kind of, okay, just accept what's happening and just enjoy whatever it is presented. So that is the eclipse on the 8th. It's, like I said, a very complex time. Everything's gathering together. Everything is kind of heaped up together, and it can be very confusing, and you wouldn't know what to believe and who to trust even, or you wouldn't know yourself what to trust in yourself, whether something's right or wrong. It's not a time to really try and be definitive about what's right and wrong anyway. That is because of Mercury, all of that, but also because of Jupiter, which is about to exactly conjoin Uranus in the days after this eclipse. You can see here 2 days after the eclipse on April 10th, you have Saturn Mars conjoined, and then 10 days after that on April 20th, you have Jupiter Uranus conjoined. So everything is coming to a head essentially. You can see here the day after the eclipse, Mercury's moved back into Pisces and will station by the 25th and conjoin Rahu by degree at that time as Jupiter and Uranus come together. So there are so many twists and turns and surprises that I don't think it's a month to be very definitive about anything, essentially. Whether it's money issues, family issues, joint resources, relationship issues, travel, home, work, anything, literally anything, or anyone that you're dealing with, nothing is set from the beginning of April and everything is in flux. So you really have to do something with that in some way, but then also not be definitive and trying to get it pinned down in another way. So that's the 10th. The Saturn Mars in particular is a challenging one because again, it could just lead to a lot of frustration and you might take it out on your partner or on other people. That's the 7th house. Parents could be an issue here as well because Mars rules both parents, mother and father for you, Leo. So Mars in the seventh house conjoined Saturn is what's feeling kind of hemmed back or hemmed in, or there might be some issue going on with your parents, in other words, and it might be something you're having to deal with them or with your partner, and having kind of this issue out, and it might be frustrating. And to be really patient with yourself and with them at this time, especially with your mother and father if they're alive. And again, if it were travel plans or home issues, to be really patient with those as well. So as I said, then Jupiter and Uranus then come to their conjunction by the 20th. So you can see here that by the 20th, we have Jupiter-Uranus conjunct in your ninth house. The sun has now moved in by the 13th, 14th of April into your ninth house. This is more positive. And even the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, I feel, is more positive. It could be like an unexpected benefit from all of this change that's happened from the beginning of the month, because it's ninth house, and ninth house can show good fortune. And it could be that something good is coming your way here. Like it could be an inheritance, something like that, or a loan, or a money that's coming your way in some way, or you could work out something with someone and around children as well, because Jupiter rules your fifth house. So definitely there's something financially, because the fifth house could also represent finances and more so speculation and investments. So there could be something unexpected and unexpectedly good happening here. Travel as well is another one, which Sun, of course, as it moves into Aries every year from mid-April to mid-May. Absolutely a good time to travel, a good time to explore, to widen your horizons, to think more positively about things. I think it's a really good thing that the sun, your ruler, is now stepping out of Saturn's signs and also stepping away from Rahu. It is still by aspect under Saturn in many ways, but it's still exalted. So, and it's conjunct Jupiter and Uranus. So it's almost like, when you feel like you've been let loose and free for the first time in a long time, like for example on a trip, and you feel hemmed in until then. But then when you go on the trip, it's like, oh, I've got all this energy and exuberance, and it's like you overdo it. That's maybe the only downside of this, is that you might overdo it with Jupiter and Sun and Uranus all together in your ninth house. But the thing is that Saturn is still aspecting, so I don't think it's going to allow you to overdo it. I think that's going to keep you in check. So that's actually a positive thing, I would say. And it may be coming from a partner. Maybe your partner is stopping you from doing something that you want to overdo, whether that's financially or on holiday or whatever it is, you just want to overdo it. I think that this is more positive in that you have to kind of think about your partner, essentially. You can see here as well that Venus is coming to its exact exaltation, and it was with Mercury retrograde, which is like removing in a way or mitigating the Mercury weakness. And Mercury itself retrograde is another mitigating factor. So it's almost like there's insights that come after the change, and profound changes perhaps, that then lead to deeper insights that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So the only thing is, I suppose, is that Mercury is in a way bringing down the Venus mood, because if Venus is helping Mercury out, it's seen as that Mercury in a way pulls down Venus. So it's not as exalted as perhaps it would feel, but it's still exalted, and it still feels better, and it still feels more like, okay, let's just go with these changes, essentially. And then we have a full moon in Venus sign on the 23rd, 24th, depending on where you are. So this is the moon opposite the sun, of course. This is in Libra. This is a full moon, in a sense, a need to balance out things here in terms of travel plans, especially. I would say there's a lot of potential here for travel, for sure, with the third and ninth house full moon, but especially because the sun is exalted. Now the moon is full, there could be some enjoyable interactions and all of that by the end of April for you, Leo, for sure. Again, it's just being mindful of all the other changes that are happening, including Mars now for the full moon moving into Pisces and joining Neptune, which in a few days after we can see the exact conjunction on the 29th of April, Mars and Neptune. And at the same time, Mercury is stationing to go direct in conjunct Rahu at the 25th onwards. So everything feels like it's shifting again by the end of the month. Even if it were in a more positive way, which it is, it's still all change. And then Jupiter is here at the last degree of Aries, your ninth sign, about to move into your 10th. Venus has moved into your ninth. So many positive things happening. It's like, the best way I could maybe describe this, with Mars and Neptune in Pisces, Mercury stationing with Rahu, Venus, Sun, Jupiter, Uranus in your ninth. It's kind of like, okay, you've been on this mind-blowing trip or something. You open your mind to other ways of doing things. You've been on this amazing journey, or even if it wasn't a holiday or a trip or a travel that you're on, it's like a trip, maybe in a more metaphorical way or a figurative way. And you have this amazing experience, a mind-altering experience, and it's kind of like nothing is settling down as yet because it's going to take a while for it to settle down. But that ultimately is going to give you a perspective on doing things differently. It's going to give you a more sense of hope, I think. Subsequently, and I'll talk about it in April or in May, sorry, Jupiter will move into Taurus, into your 10th house sign. And then it's about doing things completely differently because then Uranus will join it the month after in June. And yeah, with all of this astrology in April, it's really never going to be the same again. But to see that as a positive thing and not to get too fixated on how things were because they're never going to be the same. And to see that actually there's a lot of positive things that are going to come out of this, Leo. And again, because your ninth house is so impacted by the end of the month, especially with all these planets, including your ruler exalted here from mid-April, so much more positive coming in here. And by the beginning of May, which I'll speak about next month, we have this Akshaya Tritiya with the sun and moon exalted, the most auspicious day in the year, essentially, in the beginning of May. So there's so much good on the horizon, but you have to still get through the April stuff first, which is really confusing. And, once Mercury has at least moved direct again from the 25th of April after that full moon, things can feel like they are moving forward again. And things will probably move forward again quite quickly. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Virgo rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Virgo, there's a lot going on in April. You might have heard. There's an eclipse in your seventh sign in Pisces. There already has been an eclipse in your sign from the 24th, 25th of March, a full moon partial lunar eclipse. That's set everything in motion already. And that sort of preamble into this reset on the 8th of April on that total solar eclipse in your seventh sign, with all of the planets either in there or gathering either side. Everything's kind of gathering momentum and gathering forth and creating this big change that's on the horizon in your seventh sign, with everything implicated. Essentially, it's not just that it's happening in you and your relationships, it's happening for everything. So it's going to pull everything into your life, whether whoever it is, or any relationship, anything, work thing, home thing, any other thing. Everything is sort of being implicated here. So it just suggests that this changes everything essentially. So it's kind of like those experiences in life where one thing happens, but then it has a kind of domino effect on everything else that changes everything. So we'll look at this eclipse now, first of all, and see how it's all panning out. But again, it's in your seventh sign, 25 degrees of sidereal Pisces, the very end of the sign, conjunct Rahu, the North Node, which is itself, again, a very much a changing phase, a year and a half in your life with Rahu and Ketu in your seventh and first house. So you're going through so much personal changes and sort of shedding of skin in a way that your relationships have to evolve. They cannot stay the same. They have to move on. And this eclipse is sort of like hyper and sort of in a very sort of warped way in many ways, turning the dial on that. It's kind of like hyperspeed. And it might feel like everything kind of gets revved up until this eclipse, and then it has this whole reset on the 8th of April. Then that starts to settle down afterwards. Now, the fact is, well, that Mercury, your ruler, has stationed retrograde by the 1st of April. So if we go back here, you can see Mercury is at 3 degrees of Aries in your eighth sign. So that itself is showing that there's this change happening alongside everything else, that there's this change in how you're doing things because it's your first and 10th Lord, Mercury. And in Aries, it likes to do things very clearly and from A to B as quickly as possible. But in this case, it's stopping. It's not moving forward anymore. And by the end of the first, it will move backwards. And by the 9th, the day after the eclipse, it will actually back into Pisces. So it's already been in Pisces, which in March hasn't necessarily been the most amazing transit for you in many ways, because it shows that your ruling planet is in debilitation in its weakest place. It gets a bit overwhelmed here with the many things to think about and the many feelings that have to be negotiated in Pisces with all the changes that are also happening. And now it moves into Aries in just for a brief period and then goes back into Pisces by the 9th of April. So by the end of March till the 9th of April, you have this, and actually happened on the full moon on the 25th of March. It went into Aries, and now on the new moon, it goes back into Pisces. So both the new and full moon, both eclipses, are showing the shift in your mindset of Mercury. And this one, although it's again debilitated, there's a silver lining here. So there's a couple of silver linings. Number one, Mercury's retrograde now in Pisces, as if it were exalted, behaving as if it's coming out of its weakness and coming to an exalted place in Virgo, as if, you know, the change that happened, whatever's happening, gives you new insight and new ways of looking at things, and that gives you more energy to think about things differently and to do things differently. At the same time, Venus, which is exalted, in a way mitigates Mercury's weakness and props it up and makes you feel better and makes you feel better about what you're doing and the changes that you're going through. The downside, I suppose, is that Venus itself might be sort of dragged down in that process, and you might, you know, I guess the mood might be dipped in one way as well because of that. But because your ruler Mercury is benefiting from this exchange, it's not quite an exchange, but it's kind of like when a debilitated planet is with an exalted planet, the debilitated planet kind of gets picked up and the exalted planet gets pulled down. That's the kind of way it works. But essentially, it's still better for you because you're ruled by Mercury as well as your 10th lord. So there's definitely something more positive coming out of whatever it is you're doing at this time. So I would definitely obviously be mindful of the typical Mercury retrograde advice of not doing things kind of very definitively and expecting it to be like that forevermore, and that's it, and you've worked it out and that's it. No, it is a time to redo things and to review what you're doing and how you're doing it and who you're doing it with, more so probably in this case because it's seventh house. So who are you working with? Who are you working alongside? Who are you involved with? Your relationships, all of these things are going to be up for questioning in April. But like I said, it comes out in a better situation ultimately because of, like I said, these mitigating factors. But at the same time, it's still a confused situation. So whatever insights that you do grab along the way, just remember that you're kind of collecting insights as opposed to making any definitive statements, and certainly not signing on the dotted line around any kind of agreements. Now, obviously, this would be, you might think of it as, oh, is this a good time to get married? Well, certainly not around an eclipse. Even if Venus is exalted, an eclipse and a Mercury retrograde in your seventh house with Venus is just not the best time to get married. But it could be a time where you're rethinking all about these things, or it could be about, maybe remarrying somebody, like you're married to somebody and you take vows again or something like that. That might be a better situation. But I wouldn't still at the same time, I wouldn't do that around this time. It just may be that you're thinking about relationships past, you're thinking about who you're working with as well as who you're romantically connected with. And all of this has a knock-on effect on you and on many areas of your life. In fact, maybe all of them. So the other thing to say is that 2 days after the eclipse, Saturn and Mars are together. Now, this is tense. And in a way, it can benefit you enormously by having Saturn and Mars in your sixth house. But it could also just be that, just be tense. The reason why they both benefit in this house is because it's about work and improvement and effort. And Saturn and Mars challenge you to make improvements and make effort to improve your life, your day-to-day life, your health routines, your work routines, making sure that you're on it. Like this is probably a better expression of Saturn and Mars without overdoing anything. And to, get something going here that you can feel more deliberate in your actions, I would say, with Saturn Mars conjunct. Otherwise, it could feel very frustrating when, especially in any kind of dealings with other people, you're trying to communicate with others. And it's kind of like, especially co-worker situations, this could be really frustrating. Just be really mindful around other people around this time, around the whole month of April, I would say, but especially leading up to this 10th of April. And then after the 10th, they kind of start breaking up. And it's almost like sometimes with Saturn, it's a conjunctions. It leads to the conjunction and that kind of builds into that situation, and then it kind of releases it in a way. It's oftentimes that after a planet has moved past Saturn, that things kind of get eased up quite a lot. So then we'll see that the next conjunction, and you can see here Mercury's going back and it's going to meet with Rahu and station on the degree of Rahu by the time it stations on the 25th. But on the 20th, I want to point out here that Rahu or Jupiter and Uranus are both conjoined by exact degree. The Sun by the 13th, 14th has moved into Aries, Venus a week later, And all of this eighth house activity now is getting churned up. So it's almost like the changes that are happening for the eclipse are sort of in a way more in your face and obvious. Like there's some change that has to happen, you know, whether it's in your relationships or whatever it might be. But these changes are not so obvious, perhaps. Jupiter, Uranus in the eighth house now with Sun could show, and the Sun being the 12th Lord, it's not that obvious. Eighth house and 12th house are hidden aspects, the subconscious. But at the same time, Jupiter Uranus is like this unexpected twist and turn that works in your favor. I do think that there's something more positive here, but it's still showing changes in your home life and in your relationships. So if you can just be open-minded, I would say throughout the month of April, and especially leading up to this exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction by the 20th, it'll work out in your favor, I would say more so. I mean, I think it will work out in your favor anyway, but again, just to be more open-minded is going to help you better than trying to be very definitive about anything at all in April. There's nothing you can be definitive about, really. You can see here by the full moon that Venus has reached its exact exaltation. We have a full moon 23rd. And then we have this kind of, you know, balancing act that has to occur between the second and the eighth. The second, of course, is highlighted here with the Sun, Jupiter, Uranus. Venus is about to step in here as well after this full moon. And the moon opposite in the second is asking you to really balance out all of these changes that are happening in your relationships, in your life in general, and having some just me time, maybe having some quality time, some family time, some good times. Second sign is very much about feeling safe, secure around people and, around the dinner table, perhaps. This would be a good time to kind of just stabilize certain aspects of your life here that will make you feel more safe and secure. Because, when lots of change happens, as is the case, many times we have to go and talk to it with our friends and family, and we have to sit around the table and speak about it. That's our way of processing eighth house. We have to go to the second house. Every house balances the opposite. So the second house is very much a balancing of all of those uncertainties in life, the eighth house things. The second house is literally being with your family, being with a community that know and understand what you're talking about, and you've been through this change, and you can then talk it out. So speaking it as well, which is second house, it might be a good idea. It might be a good idea to meet with friends, because the moon is your 11th lord, in the second house, and speak with friends or your network or associations of any kind, acquaintances even. Just get it out, speak it out, and that will help balance out all of these indications. Now, at the same time, be really mindful, of course, because Mercury continues to retrograde in your 7th house. Even though it was stationed by this 25th, it's doing so alongside Rahu. So speaking and being clear, it might not be the easiest thing to do because everything's changing. That's the other thing. How can you be clear about anything when it's all changing? So you can see here Venus as well has moved into the 8th house, add into this 8th house uncertainty and changes that are happening, not just in your life in general, but now also in the way you believe things can happen. 8th house is very much about change, but Venus is the 9th lord. And that's all about, okay, I thought this is what was, but maybe this isn't the way it is. And maybe this is the way it is. So again, that's why I'm saying keep an open mind throughout, and it will be a much easier time for you. This is now when Mars moves into Pisces also around that full moon on the 23rd, and then joins Neptune. Now, Mars and Neptune and Rahu later on in May in Pisces, this can be somewhere where you might feel, frustration from everything that's happened thus far. Mars stepping into your 7th sign is like, okay, and especially conjunct Neptune, is this lack of clarity around how to direct your attention and focus. And especially with your partner and people in general, where things are changing so quickly here in April that you could easily take it out on other people, essentially. So obviously to be mindful of that and to be mindful of your relationship and not to burn bridges, especially with those who you don't want to burn bridges with. Perhaps, though, there are some people that you need to cut out of your life, and that is maybe what Mars transit in your 7th is about. And especially then as it transits Rahu and the eclipse, later on in May, maybe there are things or people that you have to cut out of your life so that you can move on now with this newfound insight, a new way of being in the world. Because, like I said, Virgo, April is all about change. And so you cannot hold on to the way things were. It's all up for change now. So just be mindful by the end of the month, I would say, with this Mars-Neptune exact conjunction by the 29th of April, especially. It's reached ahead, like it's just Mars in Pisces is not very clear about where to go. If you're clear ultimately about where you're going, and or even if you're at least more open to where you could be going instead of trying to pin it down, you're probably going to have a better time in April. So that's April. I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, for Libra rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Libra, Venus, your ruler, has stepped into Pisces, its sign of exaltation in April. And although there are a lot of other things going on that can muddy the waters, there's definitely a sense of more enjoyment and ease and going with the flow and all of the water analogies that you can think of because it's Pisces. And we have an eclipse coming up in Pisces. We have Mercury retrograding back into Pisces, conjunct Venus, and all the planets either side of Pisces. It's kind of like, well, if I'm stuck here in this paradise, then, well, that's not such a bad thing, is it? It's paradise. So in other words, notice where you are in your life and notice those moments of pleasure, those moments of just pure appreciation for whatever it is. And even if you feel like stuck in that, or there's no choice but to move in this direction, or to go here or go there, or be with this person or that person, or in this case, perhaps to do this thing, that the sixth house is very much about the things you have to do every day. But if you have to do something, why not enjoy doing it? Think about it that way. Like you're stuck on something that you have to do, and it's kind of like, okay, Venus exalted now is telling you that, well, this is life. Life is this. It's not just about you know, the holidays. It's not just about the good times and the parties. It's also about just the day-to-day stuff. And if you can't enjoy the day-to-day stuff, Venus in Pisces is asking you why you can't enjoy that. Now, the issue here, of course, is that you might also, especially after the eclipse on April 8th, with Mercury going back into Pisces, you might start to really start getting bogged down in the details here again. It might, have to work out so much that it could be easily sort of lost, that sense that you might initially grasp in April of just sheer enjoyment for no reason but to enjoy it, just enjoy whatever it is, whatever's coming your way. Just enjoy life as it comes, day by day, minute by minute. But Mercury retrograding back into Pisces from the 9th of April and all of that throughout the month really of April, again, making you maybe fixated on issues. And fixated is a word that's not too strong a word to apply here because of Rahu, the North Node, in your sixth sign. So let's show you the first of all, the eclipse, which is on the 8th, is at 25 degrees of Pisces. It's very closely conjunct Rahu, the North Node. That means it's a total solar eclipse. That's a reset, a complete reset in your life. Now, that could also mean in your day-to-day life, your work life, your daily routines, whether it's work or health regimes. It's also about health routines. Like, so maybe some insight that's, brought to your awareness, like, a revelation that comes out in terms of how you're doing things and maybe how better to do things. The eighth house is, or the sixth house is very much about doing things better, improving your life. But again, as I would point out, with Venus here exalted, the reason why it helps you in any way is that you might just be able to grasp this notion that sounds like a complete contradiction, but that isn't. That is, when you are improving yourself in any way and in trying to improve a situation in your life in some way, you can still enjoy what is. And again, it sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. From a spiritual point of view, at least, there is a way that we can all just enjoy what is while also making it better. So that I think is the kind of crux of what's going on here for you, Libra, because it's sixth house. It's about letting go of what you need to let go of, working towards what you need to work towards, but at the same time, just enjoying the process. Enjoy what is. Now, of course, there are lots of other things going on around this eclipse, including the Saturn-Mars conjunction on one side and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the other in Mars's sign. So there could be some frustrations that you're having to deal with. But like I said, it could be other people around you. It could be your partner, for example, with the Mars, or it could be a co-worker or a relative or a neighbor or a sibling on the other side. So it's like a partner and a sibling, or someone and someone else, both kind of at loggerheads or something, like where there's a situation you're caught in the middle of, and in some home situation perhaps, or some relationship issue that you're in the middle of, and then you're having to work out the issues for everybody. And because Libra, you're all about the peace negotiations, you're all about balance and equality. It might be a bit tricky, but again, at the same time, you are there in the middle of it all. And why not enjoy where you find yourself, even if it's within a conflict? Because that's the other thing about the sixth sign. Though you don't like conflict, Libra, because the sixth sign is Pisces, you might be finding yourself in one, or it could be some inner conflict that you're experiencing that you don't want to be in. But again, find a place to enjoy that. Find some enjoyment in that, in the process of bettering yourself, of understanding yourself more, of while these revelations are coming up, and use them, I would say. So that's the eclipse on the 8th. A couple of days later is the exact conjunction of Saturn and Mars in Aquarius in your fifth house is about children. But if you don't have children, it's about any kind of future orientated plans you have, like speculating, financially or otherwise, creating something, producing something, making something happen. It's very much about planning. So the fact that Mars and Saturn are coming together here, with Saturn so powerful, but at the same time, Saturn in this division of Aquarius that's not as powerful. There could be some issues here around things kind of breaking apart and being frustrated with things, and plans essentially is what is likely here. Now, this could also mean in terms of relationships, it could impact your children, like I said, or a partner, where you're having to kind of negotiate a lot, and it's kind of like putting a strain on the situation. At the same time, you can see here the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is coming to a head. That happens by the 20th. So this could lead to, surprises for sure. And because it's happening in your seventh house and the sun now moving into your seventh house from mid-April to mid-May, it really lights up that part of your life. And relationships are going to be key here. So in this case, the more positive expression here would be a positive expectation of something that's changing around the corner in terms of your relationship or for your partner. So that could be some new development. With anybody, actually, it might not just be a romantic partner. It could be a business partner, a co-worker. Jupiter rules your sixth house. It could be a sibling. It could be positive news about your sibling. It could be positive news about a co-worker. It could be about your partner. But whoever it is, there's something positive coming out of this situation, that you probably don't see from the beginning of the month, but I think that comes out by the end of the month. There's some positive revelation or some unexpected good news around something. And again, it doesn't mean that there aren't other complexities, including, the Mercury retrograde and all of that back into your sixth house, started in your seventh house at the beginning of the month, and then on the 9th moved back into your sixth house. There's some things you have to negotiate and details that are having to be worked out that aren't working out that clearly. And then by the full moon on the 23rd, you see here it's a full moon in your sign, and it's trying to balance all of these indications here of all these changes that are happening in your relationships and your, day-to-day life. Venus at this time is exalted, almost exactly. So it is a more beneficial thing at this time, I would say, to kind of take some time out and just allow things to be more and find a balance between, enjoyment and all these changes that are happening and all the things that you have to do. Leading up to this full moon, especially, I think would be a really important time to, just let loose a little more and let go a little more and enjoy yourself a little more instead of having to do so much. Because the emphasis, again, is all Rahu in the sixth house and the eclipse and all the planets here, and now Mercury retrograde. Sixth house, it could really just get you bogged down in what you have to do every day. Opposite is the 12th house, where this whole thing kicked off in a way with the March 25th lunar eclipse. And with Ketu here emphasizing this need here, it's about letting go. It's about, allowing things to be. And, it's all happening perfectly. Just allow it to be. And the moon leading up to this full moon on the 23rd is that kind of reset and way in your life, because it probably has felt in the beginning of the month and towards the end of just so much going on, so many things to do with, so many details to work out, and so much that could frustrate, even, for you who likes to keep things balanced and, in harmony, so many things that can feel disharmonious and out of whack. And even if, again, it's a positive change, it's like it just is so much change that it disrupts everything, that it takes a while for everything to settle down again to equilibrium. So again, leading up to this full moon on the 23rd, I would say is an important time to kind of re-evaluate and reassess and rebalance everything. And then you have this Mars moving into Pisces. So that's the last thing I will talk about. And that's an exact conjunction with Neptune also by the 29th. So Mars in Pisces conjunct Neptune, and then in May conjunct Rahu in your sixth sign. It's a better place to put Mars in many ways, but it is again sixth sign, so it's going to bring some conflict that perhaps you don't necessarily want to deal with. But Mars is best to deal with it in the sixth sign. It could bring up some conflict with the partner or a conflict for them, not necessarily you having a conflict with them, but they could have a conflict in some way. And they might just be conflicted in some way about, where they're putting their energy and what they need to do, because it's Mars conjunct Neptune in Pisces. So Mars in Pisces already is not very clear about where it's going or what it's doing and a direct route to get there, but conjunct Neptune even more so. And their energy, your energy might be all over the place. You might have to deal with all of these kind of issues. And again, the everyday stuff. It's all of the everyday stuff. Now you can see here, Venus, your ruler, has moved into Aries, and that happens around the full moon in Libra. And you can see that on the 23rd is the full moon. And by the 24th, Venus has moved into Aries. So that whole juncture of the full moon, I feel, even as much as the new moon in eclipse on the 8th of April, that full moon on the 23rd into 24th, I feel is just as important in a way, because it again rebalances everything. And your ruler then moving into Aries in the 7th is, bringing all of these benefics back into your 7th house, back into your life, into your relationships. And I think that's a positive thing for your relationships. But yet still, there's still a lot to work out with this 6th house activation. And it's kind of like, especially now with Venus and Mars exchanging signs, during this period, this is leading into the end of April and May, especially Venus in Aries or not exchanging signs, but Jupiter and Mars exchanging signs. So it's kind of like this kind of Jupiter Mars 6th, 7th exchange is a bit tricky. There's a lot of benefit here, and there's a lot of enjoyment, a lot of comfort that you're experiencing, as surprising as these developments are. But then there's a lot of things that you have to work out in the 6th house. And when a 6th and 7th house exchange occurs, it feels a bit more conflicted in a way. But again, I would say that this is probably one of the things about April more than any month in the year. It's such a mixed bag because there's so many positive things happening, but because they're happening on the tail end of some really challenging things, we're having to kind of take both. And so I think for you, Libra, considering that more than anything is that if what is balance, essentially, it's about balancing everything, that you have to do a bit of what you don't really want to do and then enjoy what you want. You have to do a bit of the hard work to get the enjoyment, to get the downtime. And you have to find a balance between all of these things. You have to deal with some issue perhaps in a relationship that you maybe don't want to tackle, but then when you do, it improves your relationship. And so maybe this is the best way of approaching the 6th, 7th house exchange is let's maybe focus on something I have to in my partnership, my relationship. And by doing that, it will actually improve the relationship. I can go even deeper with this person now. So, Libra, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Scorpio rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Scorpio, Mars, your ruler, is now conjoined Saturn in your 4th house sign, and it's about to come head to head with Saturn on the 10th of April, just after the total solar eclipse in your 5th sign. So there are obviously lots of changes going on here. It doesn't mean that it's bad change. And if we consider the end portion of all of these conjunctions by looking at Jupiter and Uranus in Aries, Mars's sign, you could see how there's potentially some conflict that has arisen here, but that there's something that you can push through and then have an unexpected development that leads to a more positive situation. So the reason I say that is because the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is in Aries, the 6th whole sign for you. And in a way, Scorpio, you're all about dealing with conflict and working something out. And without that, you really don't thrive. So if you consider it that way, that there's something here that you need to figure out in terms of home life and day-to-day life. And there's some conflict that has to be addressed and some issue that has to be worked through. It's just that in April, the details are very sketchy. And to be okay with that and to be okay with not being clear about all of those, but at the same time still pushing through on something and focusing all your energy towards a goal and towards doing something and to improving your life and your day-to-day life especially. So the sixth house is very much about day-to-day life, but its ruler Mars is in your fourth sign, which is about happiness and home life and how, our happiness really hinges on our home life, really, essentially. Anyway, the fourth house and its lord Saturn in your chart is a really important planet to consider. Am I happy? Is my home life happy? Am I happy in general? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to make myself happy? Because that's Saturn's aspect from the fourth to the sixth. And so now its conjunction with Mars sort of doubles up on that and re-emphasizes this sort of need to look at these things that are not making you happy, perhaps, and removing them. That's maybe one thing that both Saturn and Mars have in common, even though they do so in very different ways. They remove things because Mars is very incisive and it's like, no, that's no good. I have to get rid of that. It's not making me happy. And Saturn is like really long look at what that is and what that isn't also. Saturn in the fourth house is as much about what isn't making me happy and removing that than it is about putting something else in. Now, of course, all of this has an impact on your home life and your relationship with your mother, more especially it's the fourth house. But any kind of home personal life issue that is going on in the background now is more likely to kind of reach a head by the 10th of April, and especially around the fact that it's an eclipse and the Mercury retrograde, which begins on the 1st of April in your sixth house, in the day-to-day life. So in April, of course, it means that your day-to-day life doesn't run as smoothly as you would normally like, but it also does mean that you are then opened up to new possibilities and new ways of doing things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise if you just kept on with your routine. This is not a routine month. April is by no stretch of the imagination a routine month. It's all up for change for everybody. Now, but for you, Aries, it's more about in your day-to-day life. Now, that could also imply work, but also your routines in general, including health routines, eating habits, and so on. Like, and especially Jupiter there, the second and fifth lord in your sixth house, conjunct Uranus, which will conjoin by exact degree by the end of April after the eclipse. So obviously, to be open-minded about these changes, not to be too definitive and try and pin anything down right now from the beginning of the month, because by the end of the month, everything has changed. And so it changes everything. You're changing your diet, you're changing your exercise routines, your daily habits are completely changing, and they have to change. And to be open-minded about what those could be at this point, instead of trying to pin them down, will be better for you. Because if you try and pin it down from the get-go and just kind of logically say, oh, I know I need to change this, and therefore I need to do this. That's all very well and good in any other instance, but in this case, because everything else is in flux, there's no way you can actually say that that's the best thing to do right now. So it could be, for example, that in a work situation, as an example, sixth house is very much about working with other people, whether co-workers or whatever it might be. And then it's kind of like you have all of your plans, but they have theirs and they like insist on this, doing it this way and doing it that way. Then you have to be open-minded about that. Or there's some change that happens in your work life or in your home life that, again, if you try and pin everything down from the beginning, you're just going to get frustrated with it, essentially. So let me show you the eclipse first of all, which is the kind of like the big reset in the whole period. That's on the 8th of April at 25 degrees of Pisces, your fifth whole sign, which is very much about planning the future anyway. So the fact that there's a lot of plans kind of hanging in the air here, which is likely to be the case with Rahu and eclipse here. Venus has moved in with Neptune here as well. So there's a lot to hope for. There's a lot to be positive about. But again, because it's all hanging around in the air as a possibility at this point, perhaps, again, it's another reason to be open-minded about how all of this lands and to not worry about how it's going to land eventually, because it will land. By the time Saturn makes it in here to the fifth house by next year, everything has to land and starts to get really implemented in a very sort of pragmatic way. But right now, and for this eclipse, it's all up in the air. So don't try and pin your plans down too tightly, I would say, at this point. This eclipse is shaking it all up. This eclipse also in the fifth house could show changes that are happening in your life in other ways as well. If you have children, for example, like you could be going through changes with them, or they could be going through a lot of changes, and that subsequently changes your life as well, like your day-to-day life, because they've gone through changes. Um, It could be to do with a partner as well, because it's the fifth house is very much about the love in a relationship, the romance. There might have to be some changes that happen here. Maybe you re discover some romantic sort of part of you and with a relationship that you're having. Could be something like that. I don't want to be overly romantic about it, but that's certainly Rahu in the fifth house. It's definitely about romance and love. And yeah, it could actually be extreme in that sense as well, where you're obsessing about these things and love and looking for love. And if you're not partnered, especially, this could be an obsession. Even if you are partnered, fifth house Rahu can sometimes, and especially now with Venus exalted in Pisces, can be this kind of overly romanticizing a thing or a person um in April for sure. But again, I mean, that doesn't sound bad. I mean, like other signs are having to deal with all of these eclipses and all of these planets gathering in other more challenging aspects of their life. Whereas for you, Scorpio, it's the least enjoyable. Fifth house is all about fun and entertainment and enjoyment. So even though that's showing changes and in your relationships and all of that, at least there's some good times to be had. But I would just highlight this need for you to be open-minded about what those things are and what perhaps revelations that this throws up for you. So you can see here the Saturn-Mars a couple of days after the eclipse on March or on April 10th is the exact conjunction. And I always find with the conjunctions with Saturn that it's leading up to the conjunction that's the most intense, and then it kind of eases off once it passes Saturn. So to be mindful up to the 10th of April, especially as this kind of pressure, maybe your frustration builds. And again, around some home situation. And after the 10th, then maybe how it starts to ease and maybe something starts to move forward subsequently. And then the other thing to happen is the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus on the 20th. This is leading up to the full moon, and the full moon is on the 23rd in your 12th whole sign. This is where, now you can see here as well, the sun has moved into April or into Aries by mid-April. Mercury has moved back after the eclipse and conjoined Rahu and stationing really a couple of days after this full moon on the 25th. Venus is exalted. There's some really nice astrology here. You can see here Mars has moved into Pisces on the full moon itself, or a bit around that time, the 23rd, I think, yes. And that itself is a real focus again on fifth house, on enjoyment. But to me, this feels in a way as important as the eclipse that happened in your fifth house. That there's a need here to kind of renegotiate everything and to rebalance everything out and to let go of many things for this full moon, especially as Jupiter and Uranus have come together and maybe brought up some new development of some kind. Might be a work thing, might be a health thing, might be a day-to-day thing, whatever it is, there's something new going on now. And now it's kind of like with Mars moving into your fifth sign in exchange with Jupiter in Aries just for the last week of the month of April. This exchange between Mars and Jupiter and the fifth and sixth could show some conflict that has to be dealt with for sure. But, it's kind of like, fifth house is so enjoyable that when you bring in the sixth house in any way, it could show that you're overindulging and then creating a problem. Like, for example, obviously, health-wise, eating too much, drinking too much, those kinds of things will show you a problem straight away with this kind of configuration. But in terms of relationship, it could be like so much enjoyment, but that leads to conflict. That's the exchange between the fifth and sixth. So to be mindful of that for the last week of April, I would say, Scorpio, and any kind of conflict resolution that has to occur now. Any plans that you're making again around home life, enjoyment, day-to-day life, and how all of these impact you, and all the changes that are coming up at this time is important throughout the month, but especially the last week for that particular configuration. So the full moon is kind of like, in a way, this sort of reset of everything again, and this resolution and again conflict resolution, I think that can happen by the end of April, and that letting go process that can happen then after the 23rd. Venus, you can see here, moves into Aries, and so though you might have been, and you can see that here at what's building here, you've got Mars, Neptune conjunct in your fifth sign, and Venus now in your sixth sign, and Jupiter about to move out. And even though Jupiter, Venus, and Sun exalted, all of these things seem like a very powerful configuration. They are in many ways. Venus involved in this can bring some conflict with your partner. And it could be for what's going on elsewhere. Like there could be, again, this intense focus on enjoyment, and that if someone else isn't along for the ride, or someone is bringing some other issue, whether it's health issue or just conflict of some kind, that it could kind of make it feel less of just an enjoyable experience and more of it like a, something that has to be worked out here. That's the exchange of the fifth and sixth. Now you have Mars conjunct Neptune in your fifth and Rahu there as well. I mean, it just all feels like everything is floating around in a great sea of potential and possibility, and nothing is clear. And that itself might lead you to frustration, and that you could easily take that on a partner, or your partner could be experiencing this and they could then, take that out on you. That's Venus, the seventh lord, in the sixth house. To be mindful of that, along with this exchange between the fifth and the sixth, and the Mars conjunct Neptune, and subsequently conjunct Rahu in May. Mercury is now at least moving forward by the end of the month, the last week, after that full moon in Libra. And that itself is a kind of, okay, let's move forward with plans now. It's just that it all, again, feels like everything that's happened thus far has led to so many changes that to be able to negotiate with these first and to keep an open mind as you're implementing these new plans. Otherwise, you could really easily get frustrated with other people around you with all of these many changes. One of the things about your sign, Scorpio, is that you'd like to be, or have at least a sense of being in control. And there's very little in a way that's in your control in April, which is, I know, to hear those words is fear-inducing. But if you were, again, to think about this in a more positive way, as there's much of positivity that can come out of this, more so if you just allow things to be as they are, because there are ways that things could pan out that you cannot see right now that are much more positive than you can imagine. And if you can just allow yourself to be open-minded about those, you not only don't buckle the current, like it's happening anyway. So why not go there with ease, to know that there is something there, to have the faith, to trust the process. And that would mean that you won't get so frustrated with other people, especially around you at this time. So Scorpio, I hope that's been of help. A very mixed month for sure, for everybody, not just your own sign, but for everybody. And a month I think that will change many things in our life. And yeah, I wish you all the best, and I hope that's been of help. Until next time. For Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Sagittarius, your ruler Jupiter is about to conjoin Uranus in Aries by the 20th of April, after the eclipse in its sign in Pisces on April 8th. So there is a lot going on in April, a lot of changes, a lot of things that I think can change more positively ultimately. If we think about Jupiter and Uranus as sort of spearheading this new change, this new direction in your fifth house. And even though some of the changes that are happening might feel frustrating, or some things might feel slow in getting going, and also more especially because of Mercury retrograde and not being very clear about anything, ultimately, I think that there are some more positive things, more positive news coming out of this. And in a way, sometimes if we just look at our life like that, it's helpful. And that's what astrology, I think, can do for us. We can just like look at our life as a news report, like what's happening in my life today, what's happening in my life this month, looking back at the month and looking forward, what may happen, as the news reports often do. This is kind of forecasting what may happen because of what is happening. That is very much about what the fifth house is about anyway. It's about planning and predicting the future, speculating about the future, fifth house, and it's about thinking about the future. So even if you don't make predictions necessarily, thinking about the future is in a way predicting. So fifth house is where Jupiter is your ruler, and conjoined Uranus with Mercury about to station retrograde on the 1st of April. Everything obviously has to be rethought in a way, because rethought in one way, because Mercury is moving backwards, retrograde, right? In your fifth house. So that's a rethink of everything you're planning. Secondly, Jupiter conjunct Uranus in your fifth house is a surprise twist and turn somewhere along the way. And so having to be open-minded about what you're planning, because something else gets presented to you. Could be something, anything to do with fifth house activity, but it could also be to do with your home life and your own clear direction in life in general, because Jupiter is your first and fourth lord. So there could be some issue here. For anyone who has children, obviously that would be more obvious and that would be easily expressed through them. Children are constantly changing anyway. So of course that means that you'll clearly see the changes like more obviously in April. it's kind of like a growth spurt, like it's going to be like unexpected. But if you don't have children, it's anything again that you're growing, that you're developing, that you're geared towards in your life in the fifth house. And so any kind of planning at all could also be relationships as well. Apart from that, like fifth house is very much about the romantic beginning of a relationship. So I would say again, just be open-minded about the changes that are happening now and try not to get too bogged down in the details that could easily frustrate you or confuse you more so. The frustration maybe more so coming from Mars-Saturn conjunction and the confusion from Mercury retrograding back into Pisces conjunct Rahu in your fourth house. This shows obviously there's a lot of changes happening in your fourth and your 10th house with the eclipses. So home and work life are going through a lot of changes. And the fact as well that the sun, which is being eclipsed, this is the thing. So I'll show you the eclipse now on the 8th. It's the sun, your ninth lord, which is eclipsed in your fourth house. And so there's some unexpected change here, perhaps in terms of travel and living situation and things like that. And also that's what ultimately then leads to the changes perhaps that you're planning on, or that you're not necessarily planning on right now from even the beginning of April, but by the end of April, you'll probably have a different mindset and a different plan that you can then instigate. And because Mercury, again, remember, is retrograde from the 1st of April, it initially wants to plan things in Aries, in the fifth house especially. It has a lot of plans in mind, but then it goes retrograde. So then you can't really go ahead with those plans because everything's kind of turned around. So then it does literally turn around by the day after the eclipse. It goes back into Pisces by the 9th of April. And then that is a double kind of negative in a way. There's more positive that comes out of that ultimately. It's like behaving as if it's exalted and also conjoin Venus, which is exalted, props up Mercury in a way more so. So this can help your relationships and your work, career, home life. Everything can be benefited from in this case, but only again if you're to keep an open mind about the details. They're not clear at the same time. It might feel like you're getting great insights into things and things are, revealed to you around the eclipse and the Mercury retrograde, but because the revelations themselves are kind of coming hard and fast, it's very hard to kind of pin anything down right now, I would say. So any kind of home plans, travel plans, plans for your children, and especially both travel with children, I would say just keep an open mind about that. It could just lead to all kinds of different things that you have to be really flexible about, I would say. So then you can see here as well by the day after, 2 days after the eclipse on April 10th, we have an exact conjunction between Mars and Saturn in your third whole sign. Now, Mars is your fifth lord as well as your 12th lord. So that's why you always have to be a bit loose with plans anyway. But when it is in your third house with Saturn, its ruler, obviously Mars is coming under the thumb of Saturn, and Saturn is also aspecting Aries, where Jupiter and Uranus are conjoining. So in a way, that's a good thing because it's like it doesn't let you get out of hand with any plans. Saturn is very cautious and wants to kind of hold things back in a way, but it's certainly holding Mars back now. And this could be frustrating in a way by the 10th of April, especially leading up to that whole period. But I always find that when planets move beyond Saturn, that there's this release almost immediately, really. It still lingers somewhat, but it's kind of like the lead up to the conjunction and then the release after. And Saturn can sometimes literally feel like a release from prison. It's like this kind of prison of your mind in a way. And the third house especially is about travel as well. So we combine that with the other indications. There could be some issue around moving around. But it could also be issues around thinking clearly about things and expressing yourself, and especially with other people. Obviously, this is leading to some frustration that has to be addressed, but also, like I said, going beyond that to kind of open out this into a different way of looking at things and thinking about things, and then subsequently planning things. I think there's great potential here for you to open your mind to different ways of doing things ultimately. Both Saturn and Mars do well in the third at the end of the day, because it is very much about planning for yourself something you want. The issue that they can have sometimes, especially when they're conjoined, is that one is pushing and one is pulling. So you really want this thing, that's Mars, but then Saturn is like, oh, I don't know if I really should do it. So it's kind of like this push-pull that goes on. So now that's especially the case if you're traveling around. If you have a car full of kids and you're moving around, you're driving around in that kind of situation, just be really mindful. If you're driving around just generally and there's a lot going on in your mind, in your head, obviously that's just to be mindful when you're traveling, because this kind of travel kind of it shows here might be some delays perhaps, as well, but also just kind of, yeah, just be mindful of traveling, I would say. Again, it does indicate travel though, or a need to travel, and something that would make you very happy at this time. And I think Mercury retrogrades generally anyway are a good time to take some time out. But again, I would just be mindful as you're driving around or traveling around and moving around, and maybe think about needing to get somewhere and on retreat or go somewhere and enjoy some downtime somewhere. And this time out of time, as Mercury often is, to just kick back a bit more and go on some sort of holiday somewhere that isn't too complicated, that there isn't all of these different things you have to deal with. Now, I know for people who are listening that have children, and when you go on holiday, there's a lot to deal with. I understand. But again, even if that were the case, just to see this lined up in your astrology is to see your life as a play, that this is the time in the play where everything gets a bit kind of chaotic. And it could still be enjoyable. Absolutely. There's a lot to enjoy here. And even considering, apart from the Jupiter in the fifth house, you've got Venus exalted in the fourth. This is absolutely a holiday situation or time spent at home enjoying yourself in some way. Mercury retrograde is, in a way, bringing down the mood somewhat, because for Mercury to be propped up, it has to bring Venus down. And even though Mercury itself, after the eclipse, is now retrograde in its debilitation, behaving as if it's exalted in Virgo, it's still debilitated and it's bringing the mood down otherwise, because Venus itself would be very just enjoyable and just a lovely time for a holiday, essentially, or just even a holiday, just taking time off work and being at home. That's Venus in the fourth. But with Mercury now, it's kind of like, it's having so many things to work out and with other people that you're maybe not being able to switch off. That's one of the issues with Mercury in the fourth house, especially, where the mind cannot switch off and just enjoy some downtime, essentially. So that's just one thing to be mindful of, because that's also what the eclipse is stirring up in you. This need for enjoyment and happiness and home time and just some peace at home. And all of these things that are happening all around and all these changes, I mean, it's probably going to give you more of a sense of this need for peace and quiet at home. But if you have kids, if you have lots of plans, then it's hard just to be at home on your own. So anyway, that is a thing to be mindful of, to balance out in terms of these transits. So then the Mars Saturn I mentioned, and now the next one is the Jupiter Uranus, and the exact conjunction is on the 20th. So here you can see on the 20th, they reach 27 degrees of Sidereal Aries, their fifth house. You can see here from mid-April, the sun has moved into Aries exalted, and Mars is about to move into Pisces. I'll get to that now. But the sun exalted in Aries is just a generally a better, more positive time of year anyway. And I think as your ninth lord, this can feel more enjoyable, absolutely. But again, be open to unexpected things happening, because Jupiter and Uranus are together now. So any kind of anything at all, again, it could be just related to personal plans, but also home life and, anything you're doing with your children, just be open. Any kind of creative work that you do, any kind of creative, self-expressive, any kind of fun activities, any relationship issues, just have an open mind and expect the unexpected, but do expect it to be positive, I would say, with this Jupiter Sun exaltation combo. It's definitely the only issue here, I would say, if anything, is that it's almost like, okay, I'm let loose now, and it's like children being let loose for the school holidays, and it's like they go crazy. They just go way overboard. This is Jupiter Sun conjoined. This could be an expression for yourself, whether you have kids or not, where everything is overboard, everything is just a bit too much. Um, but at least it's fifth house. It's an enjoyable house, and there's lots to enjoy here, I would say. You can see here that Venus is exalted at this time, and we're leading up to the full moon now on the 23rd. And the full moon, I think, is really um, as important in a way as the new moon in eclipse, because the new moon eclipse is it's more obviously a big change that's happening, and it's home life for you, and it's a lot to do with travel plans maybe, or plans in general, and keeping an open mind about that. But this full moon on the 23rd, 24th, depending on where you are, this is like a reset in another way. I feel like this is like finding a balance with all of this change that's happened. And okay, I've got all of these things now, all of these different things have happened in the month of April. But by the end of April and this full moon, I have to find a resolution and balance with the full moon in Libra. And, you know, I want to think about my bigger plans and ambitions here. That's the 11th house. And I want to think about, you know, how I need to change these perhaps to kind of fit this new narrative now, this new plan that I have. So you kind of almost in a way have to think about it as, I guess, the personal changes that you're going through and your family, maybe life is going through versus your bigger plans and ambitions that they have to kind of adjust to meet with those changes that are going on in your personal life, essentially. I think that's what the full moon for you will be about. You can see here as well that Mars is moving into Pisces as Venus is about to move out. So that's another couple of things that start shifting. Venus now moves into your fifth sign, and that is also enjoyable. Mars is in your fourth sign, conjunct Neptune, and exchanges signs with Jupiter, your Lord. So fourth and fifth exchange is also very positive. I mean, there's a lot more positive astrology going on by the end of April and into May than the beginning of April for sure. Yes, Saturn continues to aspect, but that itself, you know, is maybe a no bad thing because it might prevent you from going overboard. Or again, if you have children from them going overboard, you might be having to put restraints on them in some way. Literally, maybe, I don't know, if they're very young. But this exchange between Mars and Jupiter, fourth and fifth houses, I mean, it is a positive thing, even if Mars is conjoined Neptune now and isn't very clear about where it's going, and you might not be clear about where to put your energy. Again, for me, this screams like a child being let loose for the school holidays, and it's kind of routine is out the window. Let's just enjoy something, and it's kind of goes overboard. For you to be mindful of that inner child in a way, and to be open-minded about what's happening now, to be spontaneous without being reckless, to be enthusiastic and enjoy what's happening without being too bogged down in the details. I think this is what is available in April. You can see here that Mercury is stationing now on the 25th and conjoins Rahu by degree in your fourth house. So again, keep an open mind and nothing's set yet. Even if Mercury's moving forward now, nothing is clear. Nothing is in terms of the details because now Mercury is moving forward and Venus has left the sign. It is now in again a weak position. It's overwhelmed with all of the things that are happening. So to be mindful of that without filling your mind, pardon the pun. So mindful means just being still, as opposed to stuffing your mind and trying to work everything out at this time by the end of the month, more especially. So Sagittarius, a very mixed bag of a month again, but it seems to be kind of moving into a more positive phase by the end of April. Lots of change even at the beginning, which is positive. So it's not that it's not, but it's just confusing perhaps, and lots of change happening. So I hope you enjoy it. I wish you all the best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Capricorn rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Capricorn, your ruler Saturn is moving through your second house sign and will conjoin with Mars as it catches up to it by April 10th, just after a total lunar eclipse, or sorry, a total solar eclipse in your third house sign, Pisces, by the 8th of April. So there's quite a lot of change happening in April. And on top of that, we have a Mercury retrograde from your fourth back into your third house, Pisces, and then a conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus after the eclipse on April 20th. So everything is lined up to change, and it's kind of like a domino effect where one thing leads to another and to another. And to be mindful of that and any changes that you're going through, to allow the dust to settle after April. And by the end of April, things should be more clear about how to move forward, even if the details are a bit sketchy still until Mercury makes it out of Pisces by May. So we can see here that Saturn, first of all, and I'll show you the eclipse on the 8th of April. It's at 25 degrees of Pisces, and it is in your third house sign. We've had an eclipse already in Virgo. That was your ninth house sign. This is a lot to do with travel plans, changes in this sphere of your life. But it's also a lot to do with changing how you think about things. And travel and thinking go hand in hand. This is why the third and ninth house represent both. Third house is very much about opinions and everyday travels, like day-to-day travels. And then the ninth house is long distance or big longer term travel and higher minded stuff, shall we say, and beliefs and philosophies. And the third house, you might say, is the thoughts that we think every day that then eventually become our belief systems, which is the ninth house. So obviously the fact that and again, these are travel. So the third house, everyday travel, ninth house, long distance travel. So travel broadens the mind, as they say, everyday travel maybe gets you kind of stuck in a certain way of doing things. Like you go to the same shop every day, you go to the same neighborhood, you go to the same whatever. That's third house. And you kind of get caught in loops in that way. We all do, I'm saying. So that's third house. Ninth house is different because it kind of takes you out of your everyday life in a way, and it brings you into a bigger, kind of more open, expansive state of mind. The fact that Ketu is in the ninth house, and that is showing a removal, an ending of some belief that you've held maybe for a long time. And that may have come from, again, experiences that have developed in your third house in terms of your everyday life and everyday interactions and opinions. Ninth house is not about opinions as much as it about things that are taught to you or like given to you in some way, handed down, a belief system that you've gathered from others. It's very much about the past. And so it's very much about kind of thinking about how that informs as well your opinions, because they feed each other. This is the thing. The ninth house feeds the third as much as the third feeds the ninth, right? So if you've been taught something by somebody, that's the ninth, and that now informs an opinion you have. You can think about that the other way around as well. And the third house, the opinions you have informing and the engagements that you have every day and the interactions you have with people and what you express every day to other people informs what you believe as well. When the nodes are in these signs, this is what all gets kind of strung up like and kind of looped up in your mind. So it's like the image of the nose as the head and tail of the serpent devouring its own tail. This loop that we get in is important to acknowledge in terms of the thoughts and the beliefs that you hold, the thoughts that you're thinking daily and the beliefs that you have. And this is an opportunity, therefore, with the South Node Ketu, removing any false beliefs, removing any untruths here in your ninth house, while Rahu in your third house gets you to question what it is you believe and what you think about anything. And of course, this is all going to come to a head by the 8th with the total solar eclipse. It's a total solar eclipse in your third house. Rahu there, your second lord, very much about vision, about sight, about seeing, about clear vision. And it obviously obscuring the sun. And the moon itself is what's obscuring the sun. So there's something coming to a head here in terms of being clear, and maybe it might bring some lack of clarity initially, some distortion of reality in some way, for you to then be revealed the truth of the situation. Some thought that you have, perhaps that you didn't realize you were having that thought because of that reason, because of you being taught that or being handed down that thought or whatever it might be. Again, the best expression of this is thinking about travel and how it can change the mind. It alters our way of thinking, it expands our way of thinking, it broadens our mind. And so thinking about that at this time in terms of what you believe is possible, even, it might be that something is presented at this time where you realize, oh, I don't have to think about it that way. Maybe I can do it this way. Maybe this is what's possible now. So it can really open your mind, essentially, these eclipses. And again, the 8th of April is the major eclipse, the solar eclipse that can really have a bearing on how you think and how you express yourself ultimately. There's a lot else going on, of course, besides that. And of course, your ruler Saturn is conjoined Mars at the time of the eclipse. And 2 days after the eclipse, they're exactly conjoined. So this, on the 10th of April, this is a bit tense, to say the least. And Saturn now, although it's very powerful in Aquarius, it's reached 20 degrees, which is the Aries Navamsha or division of Aquarius, which is a kind of underlying weakness that's going on here. And now conjunct Mars, your 4th and 11th Lord. There could be some issue here around family, home life, and friends, and social life, and food and enjoyment, and things like that might be coming to a head here where you might have to pull back a bit, I would say. This Saturn in Aquarius, at any rate, is about looking at your diet and family as well, and money and finances. All of that are second house, and thinking about what you value in life. That's all what this Saturn is asking you to really focus hard on. But now that Mars is conjoined Saturn, it might implicate other people like family and friends, where it's all kind of coming to a head. And there could be some turnaround here when you add the fact that there's in the eclipse. There could be something changing here at this point in your diet, in your family, in your finances, for example, as major issues of the second house. But again, it's because it's implicating your home life and friends and networks and associates. There's some issue like pivoting around this whole thing. You can see here that Mercury, the day after the eclipse on April 9th, has moved back into Pisces. And we'll see here the Jupiter-Uranus exact conjunction by the 20th, if I bring it forward. So everything is kind of coming to a head in this respect as well. If I bring it back to your sign here, you can see here that Jupiter and Uranus are exactly conjoined by the 20th. And this is where the sun moves into Aries by mid-April to mid-May, always a more positive time of year for any of us. But certainly the sun exalted in your fourth house is a time to enjoy your home life more so, and to maybe make some changes in your home and that make it more enjoyable, because it's the eighth lord, the sun, in your fourth. So it could be that you just maybe do a spring clean, as many of us do at this time of year, and just do a change around. But it could also show that there are changes going on in your home life when we consider what's coming up as well with the exchange as well between Mars and Jupiter for the last week of the month. So Mars is about to move into Pisces, and then Jupiter is about to move into, or Jupiter then exchanges with Mars. So this is leading up to the full moon on the 23rd, 24th. So Mars is moving into Pisces the 23rd, Jupiter's in Aries. And for that last week of April, with Mercury also going back through Pisces, this exchange between the 3rd and the 4th shows that there may be some changes going around travel plans and home life. So all of the things I mentioned essentially with the eclipse being stirred up and changed in maybe more practical ways by the end of April, the last week of April. And because this is a full moon, if I show you the full moon here opposite on the 24th, again, it depends where you are, but around this time on the 23rd, late on the 23rd or on the 24th, we have a full moon in Libra, opposite an exalted sun. Again, this exchange between Mars and Jupiter. Mercury is still retrograde. Venus is exalted, about to move into Aries. There's some changes going on here in home life for sure. And I think that could be very positive, because now you can see here the day after we have Venus moving into Aries, your fourth house. This is normally a time to enjoy home life, to really kind of settle down at home and enjoy your own space and your own time at home. But it might be because of all the changes that have been happening, unexpected changes that have been happening in your life. And it's kind of like, yeah, let me just have some downtime now and then just enjoy some time off. It could be a holiday as well. Fourth house is very much like taking a holiday in other ways. But Mercury, of course, which is the ninth lord, still retrograde, and now stationing on the 25th as Venus moves, and then stationing with Rahu in your third. Travel plans in April, I would say, throughout the whole of April, from the beginning to the end, are something to be mindful of, Capricorn. I'm not saying you shouldn't travel, because actually this might imply that you actually will be, but I would say that it could also suggest that you have to be really open-minded about your plans and how things can, have to change last minute, or just being open to the unexpected all the time in April, not just traveling, not just home life, everything. Be open to every kind of change that's happening, because there's so much changing. You can see here as well that Mars, your fourth lord, again, exchanging with Jupiter, is now conjoined Neptune, and that exact conjunction occurs on the 29th of April. This itself is like not being very clear about how to communicate something that really is dear to you, and or with someone at home or friend, and or with a group of people, that there's something that's not maybe clear, or you're trying to be clear, but it's not 100% clear. That's Mars Neptune conjunct. And again, as the ongoing Mars-Jupiter conjunct or exchange for the last week of April could highlight themes here about having to negotiate and kind of, to keep the peace, maybe to, not say the thing that you're going to say, perhaps, that's Mars in the third, exchanging with Jupiter in the fourth. This full moon perhaps would highlight all of this as well, because it's opposite in Libra in your 10th sign. So if it's a social engagement, for example, on the 23rd, 24th full moon, it could bring things out to a head. And it could also, though, rebalance everything and reorient everything around all of these changes that have happened thus far. So, for example, if somebody, Capricorn rising moon, has gone through a lot of changes in their home, and travel has changed a lot of things, and, everything is changing in terms of their day-to-day life in other ways, there could be this kind of need, therefore, by the full moon to kind of take a step back from all of that. And maybe actually, stepping back from home life might be actually going out to work. That's the other thing about the 10th house. Like, it does at least afford us this ability to take a step back from work and to think about our bigger objectives in life, and then get more perspective on these changes that are happening in the home. So think about that in terms of maybe even just stepping back from it, from your own literal house, home situation, and and thinking like further afield, perhaps, or just like removing yourself from that situation and getting a balance on it with this full moon. That's probably a better expression of this, I would say. And then, as I mentioned, on the 29th, there's the Mars-Neptune exact conjunction in your third. Mars in the third is well placed in one way because it's very much about going for what it wants. But with Neptune, it's just not clear about what that is. So you might not be clear about what you want now because of all the changes that have happened. So if a lot of changes have happened at home, it will obviously change and inform the way you look at what is possible moving forward. And that's something to think about, I think, throughout the month of April, Capricorn. But apart from that, I think there's a lot of positive things happening as well. Like the Jupiter Sun, is one thing, but Jupiter and Sun is very positive in many ways as well. It's almost like too positive. It's over exuberant and like takes on too much. Perhaps that's something to be mindful of in terms of any kind of home situation going on. Um, but in general, I would say just taking on too much and maybe overdoing it, I would say. The Venus and in fourth house is also enjoyable. And although all of these planets move into Taurus and combust this, like they combust the sun, they're close to the sun by the time they reach Taurus. There is something that's being set up here for you, Capricorn, I believe, where, there's something in terms of changes that have happened and that inform the way you look at things in a different way. The eclipse is really just changing everything that then lead to these more practical changes, I think, in home life more so, by the end of April. So, Capricorn, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, for Aquarius rising and or moon sign for April 2024. So Aquarius, your ruler Saturn is about to be met with Mars in your sign by the 10th of April. And you might feel this build up to the 10th of April as a pressure that's building in one sense or another. Not to say that that's a negative thing necessarily. Pressure and focus, in a sense, can be a very positive thing if you really focus the energy and intend something very deliberately. This is what I think Saturn and Mars conjoined in your first sign represents. The third house ruler, Mars, as well as the 10th house ruler, is very much about doing something deliberately and, having a set intention. So Mars, Saturn, of course, could be expressed just as that, just very focused intention on what you want to make happen. However, of course, as always with Mars, Saturn, it's kind of sometimes a bit frustrating when we don't get what we want as soon as we want it. That's one of the things of Mars, Saturn. Even though I would say because you're ruled by Saturn and Saturn's strength is winning over in a sense, in one way or the other, that the bigger picture and the long-term plan here is more important. And a lot of what Saturn is for you, though, Aquarius, is of course the 12th sign ruler, and it's as much about what you need to let go of as what you need to take on. And perhaps this lesson here is about what you need to end in order for you to move forward and be clear about your intentions moving forward. So oftentimes for you, I guess it's about what needs to be removed from the equation in order for you to get clear about the result. So if you think about it in terms of that kind of scientific way, which is what Aquarius is very much about, how much do you need to remove and how do you problem solve in this case? And so there's a few things to work out here, obviously, and it might feel like it's building to that kind of period up until the 10th. But I often see that with Saturn conjunctions, especially as soon as the planets move past the degree of Saturn, it releases that kind of tension, and it can release it quite quickly as well. So it's kind of like a build up and then release, and that can be very beneficial for you. The fact that Saturn is, continuing to aspect the planets in Aries, including the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which will also be exact by the end of April. We'll see, of course, this as a more positive, I would say, configuration where there could be some unexpected developments in your creative expression, in your plans, in your dealing with other people, for example, like you're engaging with someone and they give you an unexpected opportunity. Like if you're involved with social media, for example, which is very much the third house, that someone reaches out to you and you have this connection, this new connection all of a sudden you didn't have before, or there's something opening up here as well, while there's also something maybe ending or maybe having to kind of get focused and you get deliberate about while some other opportunity is opening up. These are, I think, what these conjunctions represent for you more so. Now, of course, there's a lot more going on besides that, and that's why it might confuse things in April, including a Mercury retrograde from the first of the month in your third sign as it moves back into your second sign, where the eclipse occurs on the 8th of April. So let me show you the eclipse first of all. That shows that, of course, you have to be open-minded about anything that you're planning and anything that you're doing at all in April. But an eclipse generally would show that anyway, to be open-minded about new revelations and new insights into ways that you can do it differently, and actually in ways that you must do it differently. Eclipses show absolute changes we have to make. So I would say this new moon total solar eclipse in Pisces, your second house sign, with Jupiter in your third, conjoined Uranus, is a surprising turn of events that could lead to unexpected advantages here, like even financial. But again, it could be some engagement with someone or something that changes the way you think about things and the way you see things as what you see as possible. Lots is possible here. This is the thing. But again, with the Mercury retrograde from the beginning of the month and the day after the eclipse, it returning to Pisces, starting out in Aries retrograde, like not being very clear about what it wants, not being very clear about how it can express what it wants. Mercury in Aries, the third sign, retrograde, and it starts off wanting to go for something, express something, and then it goes back and has to review everything it's already expressed to get clear about how it needs to go about going forward again eventually by May. So the fact that Mercury, though, goes back into Pisces and meets with Rahu, the North Node, your other ruler in Pisces, in your second sign, there's this whole reevaluation of your finances, your family situation, your values, your vision for the future. And in order for you to envision your future in a way, this Mercury retrograde is suggesting you have to review the past. And that might offer some challenges in one way, but again, obviously some more insights that help you eventually move forward. And by the time Mercury begins to station on the 25th, around the new or the full moon on the 23rd and thereafter, you know, a lot will have worked out, a lot of kinks will have worked out, but a lot of surprises as well will have presented themselves. And so be open-minded throughout the month of April, I would say, Aquarius. So moving it forward, then you can see here on the 10th, Mars and Saturn have conjoined by exact degree. So this is the time to be a bit mindful of, I would say. Just mindful in your work and in your travel and in your arrangements and communications with other people. You know, just going about day-to-day life, I would say, thinking about how this is impacting you. Mercury retrograde is itself just a time to be mindful of what you're saying, how you're communicating what you are, and how you're doing it, more as much as what you are communicating. It's how you're communicating. But now Mars conjunct Saturn with Mercury retrograde kind of suggests that you need to be a lot more mindful of that, especially if you're getting these new connections with this Jupiter-Uranus in the third. And I'll show you the exact conjunction, which is on the 20th. This is when I feel like, okay, lots of opportunities here coming your way. The sun now is moving into your third sign, exalted. There definitely is a potential here for meeting new people, new and unusual people, Uranus type of people, new opportunities from these people, new connections, new developing all kinds of new things here. So again, just to be mindful of, you know, your communication at this time, that it might not be right up to speed, you know what I mean? Because it's like you're having this new experience with this new type of person you don't normally meet, and this opportunity is given to you in this new situation that you haven't been in before. And it's like, yeah, you might not be hyper focused or very clear. And that's a lot to do with Mercury retrograde. It's a lot to do with the Saturn Mars as well, which in a way doesn't kind of lead to very, you know, fast thinking and, you know, quick on your feet kind of thing. It's a bit slower. It's going to slow you down somewhat because there's a push pull that happens with Mars Saturn. But then also, again, Saturn's aspect on your third, again, your communication is something else that you have to think about. And now the eclipse in your second sign, with Mercury now retrograde in your second sign, and it conjoining Rahu by degree and stationed there on Rahu by the 25th. It's just maybe, again, communications aren't that clear coming from you. But again, it's understandable because of all the changes that are happening. So just to be mindful for yourself that it's not business as usual in April. Things are changing. New opportunities are presenting themselves. Try and keep an open mind and maybe listen more than you speak so that you can be really open to these new opportunities. and then you won't get yourself into all kinds of binds when you say things that maybe you didn't mean, or say things that weren't clear. Other people aren't more clear about your intentions and so on. So this is the full moon, the 23rd, 24th, depending on where you are. Full moon in Libra. This is in your ninth house sign, and sun exalted in your third. This is very much about travel, opening your mind. And again, like I said, opening your mind to all kinds of different things and people and opportunities presenting themselves now. And it might be while traveling. It might be that you have this new insight into ways of doing things, ways of thinking about things with this travel opportunities coming up as well. This is a full moon in your ninth. It's normally would be a good time with the sun exalted in your third, showing that potential for travel and enjoyment. And certainly, I think there's a lot to enjoy here. And, in a way, must balance out all these other things that have been changing throughout the beginning of April. You can see here Venus, which rules the full moon, is almost done with Pisces. Its exaltation sign. Mars has just moved in to your second sign. So it leaves Saturn behind in your sign. And that, I think, will be more positive in many ways. The thing about Venus in the third, though, it's in a very warlike stance, and Mars now in your second, exchanging with Jupiter. So it's an exchange going on between your second and third. Again, with Mercury retrograde on top of everything, conjunct Rahu and stationing to go direct, communications might be really interesting at this point, shall we say, by the full moon and leading up to the Mercury station. So that whole period, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and really the whole last week of April, I would say, to be really mindful of your communication, because it might not be clear. And it's a lot to do with all of these things. Mars conjunct Neptune in your second house. Mercury stationing to go direct, slowly turning around, conjunct Rahu in your second house. Jupiter, the ruler of your second house, exchanging with Mars in your second house. So the second and third house exchange. All of that plus Venus, in your third house, in Mars's sign, aspected by Saturn, where the sun also is, aspected by Saturn, where the unexpected surprises have cropped up, Jupiter-Uranus. It's just one thing after another, kind of showing this kind of lack of clarity around how you can express yourself, because how can you when everything is changing? So, Aquarius, I would just really caution you in terms of, and it might not be like verbally, it could be like emails, it could be texting, it could be messaging. Just be mindful of all your communications and dealings with people overall in the month of April, and be open-minded to positive changes. That's the thing. And the more you can just be open-minded and keep, your ears open and eyes open for opportunities, the more you can take them on board and incorporate them and assimilate them, and then come out later on and be clear about them and be able to express them more clearly, especially by May, once Mercury then finally makes it into Aries and goes forward again. So I think this full moon around the 23rd, 24th will be an important pivot point in a way into that, as Mercury then stations to go direct after this full moon as well. So I hope that's been of help, Aquarius. It's definitely a mixed bag of a month, but it's a lot of good things mixed in there too, with a lot of changes as well. And a lot of changes that might happen in your life in very practical ways as well, in terms of finances, with the eclipses triggering now the second and eighth houses in your chart, which is very much to do with family and finances. But that could be, again, a very positive change that happens. And just expect the unexpected, but expect it to be good news. And to be open-minded with all of these new experiences you're having, whether you're traveling at all or not, whether you're just communicating and opening your mind to different people and different ways of, expressing yourself. It's ultimately, I think, all more positive at the end of the day when we consider Jupiter. And then Jupiter subsequently will move into Taurus, your fourth host sign, by May 1st. So I'll talk about that next month. But essentially, all of these changes leading to that more positive time, I think, that will lead to more enjoyment, more happiness, more comfort at home, and also more possibilities and opportunities opening up for you at work as well. So all of that to come in May, but I'll talk more about that next month. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time. For Pisces rising and or moon sign for April 2024, Pisces, your ruler Jupiter is about to conjoin Uranus by degree on April 20th. And so this has been building up until this point. And after April, of course, because April is the last whole month that Jupiter is in Aries, it will then move into Taurus by May 1st. This is an important shift, a pivot in a sense. a big change, an unexpected change at that, usually with Jupiter-Uranus conjoined. And so it's maybe radical. It could be radical when you combine that with Rahu transiting through your sign and Mars about to step into your sign in April also after its conjunction with Saturn. And after the eclipse in your sign, a total solar eclipse in your sign by April 8th. There's so much up for change here for you, Pisces. So much personal change, so much more um positive change, I would say, by the end of it all, but it might not feel like that in the beginning of April. It might feel like everything is sort of like reached the head in many ways, and maybe it could feel frustrating. It could feel like you're kind of between a rock and a hard place in many ways, with all these planets either side or in your sign, and this eclipse kind of bringing things to a head. But again, just keep an eye on the bigger picture here, which I think is Jupiter thinking about that conjunction with Uranus and then it moving into Taurus and away from Saturn's gaze, away from Rahu, away from all of these very personal changes that you're going through still, but um, it's still away. And Jupiter away can feel like, it can get more clarity in how it needs to move forward at least. And even though, again, April is so much about change that it might not feel very clear from the get-go, if you keep an eye on that bigger picture, that all of this change is absolutely necessary, that nothing can remain the same in this sense, because everything in a way is coming together, and it'll probably feel like a domino effect with one thing changing another and another and another. That again, if you can ultimately think about this as all positive, even if it doesn't feel that way initially, that's the more important thing, I think, in April. So first of all, let me show you the full moon or the, sorry, new moon and total lunar eclipse, solar eclipse, pardon me. So I'm already getting my words mixed up. And this is, of course, a lot to do with Mercury retrograde, which will do so from April 1st in your second sign and move back to where the eclipse occurs in your sign on April 8th. April 8th is a total solar eclipse in your sign. It shows that there is some mental obscuration going on. And this happens every time the moon eclipses the sun. And with Rahu, especially closely conjoined both, there's some distortion that can happen in the mind. However, it is also a revelation. That's the other thing to know with eclipses, that it both obscures and reveals at the same time often. And in a sense, in a way, you can't have the insight until something is obscured. That you can't keep going the way you're going and thinking what you're thinking until you have that blocked to be able to see things a different way. That gives you a different insight into doing it differently. So because the moon and the sun both represent the fifth and sixth, very much about planning and doing something, this is very much about keeping an open mind around this new moon total solar eclipse on the 8th of April. And when you keep an open mind, other things can be presented to you that you just couldn't have seen otherwise without an open mind, right? And Rahu, of course, all this time is showing this big change, this personal change that you're going through, and almost like peeling away the layers of who you think you are, but almost in a way also showing you that you're wearing layer after layer after layer. That's what Rahu does. It's that also that kind of almost like contradictory thing about Rahu showing that kind of mask that you wear while also wanting you to be authentically you and remove it. So it's kind of like it has to kind of, when a snake sheds its skin, it initially kind of has to flake off and peel off, and it might feel like it's coming off, and it's a process. It just doesn't like just whip it off, right? So that's what Rahu is probably making you feel like. It's probably making you feel like you have to wear the mask, but then you also are aware that it is a mask and it's not your true self. And because Rahu rules your 12th sign, it's about removing things more than anything, removing who you're not, who you aren't really, truly who you are. Getting rid of anything that you're not, essentially. So this eclipse, I think, is profound for you, Pisces. You might have gathered that from what I'm saying. This is a profound shift and a change that's happening in your life. There are lots of things that are easing this path for you, because Venus is exalted in your sign. And even the Jupiter-Uranus thing, which throws up unexpected developments, I think is more positive. It's like unexpected good news coming to you from somewhere. It could also be a career opportunity, because Jupiter is your 10th lord, conjunct Uranus in your second house. It might be some uh, opportunity potential here for some new work situation or new money situation. Who knows? I would also say, though, with Mercury retrograding from the 1st of April, and then by the day after the eclipse on April 9th, it will move back into your sign. obviously, whatever you're planning in terms of money situations and also with family dynamics and all of that, Mercury in Aries initially in April is going to be frustrating, likely, because it has to go backwards through the sign, the early degrees, and go back into your sign. Once it goes back into your sign, though, I think that it could be more positive, but not in an obvious way. Mercury retrograde in Pisces is positive because it's kind of like it changes your perception of things. And it's that perception that whatever changed in your life thus far gets you to think differently about it. And that gives you a different spin on it that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Because Mercury retrograde is like having it exalted in a way in Pisces. It's not obviously it's in Pisces, it's overwhelmed, right? And you might feel overwhelmed at times, but at other times you might have these like light bulb moments where you get this real deep insight into something. Venus also in your sign Pisces is mitigating Mercury and can really prop it up and make it feel better. So dealing with relationships, your relationship with your partner is especially important at this time because, of course, the eclipses are happening in your sign in opposite with Ketu, the South Node having instigated something from that full moon on March 25th and that eclipse, lunar eclipse. Now that Mercury is in your sign again, retrograde is asking you to go back over that ground again. It might be still a bit raw. It might be that you're feeling a bit vulnerable around these changes. They might be feel a bit vulnerable. There's a lot of change happening here for you and a lot of personal things you have to deal with at this time. And again, because of all the other conjunctions with the Mars Saturn now, and it's exact at this stage after the eclipse on April 10th, as well as the upcoming Jupiter Uranus on April 20th, 10 days later, it might feel like you're kind of hemmed in between a rock and a hard place, as I said. So it's like if you are in that situation with people, with family dynamics or whatever it might be, with work issues, with money issues, with work and family and money and all of these things kind of maybe feeling like everything is kind of hemmed in and you are kind of stuck in the middle of all of this, why not enjoy it? And if that's where you are, with the Venus exalted in your sign, with Mercury retrograde in your sign, it's kind of like suggesting with all of these personal changes that you're going through, that this has come to this now, that all of these changes that have happened and are continuing to happen in a kind of hyper speed way at this time. Why not just be still with this as much as you can and to go through the transformation because it will really work its way out eventually anyway, even if it feels like it's a bit frustrated or a bit held back or a bit, unexpected at this time. You can see here the Saturn Mars exact conjunction on April 10th is frustrating generally. I mean, Mars in the 12th house can generally feel frustrating anyway, but more especially conjunct Saturn. That is on the 10th. Then you can see on the 20th, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is exact. And that is a time to be, again, especially mindful of your ruler conjunct Uranus, of surprise. It's just not expected. And again, just think of it as something positive. When we think of unexpected, we often think about as negative, but it doesn't have to be. This could be very positive, and Jupiter-Uranus can oftentimes be very positive. The fact that Mars, which rules this, is in your 12th sign means, though, that you have to let go of an awful lot. And again, it could be your expectation. Maybe that's all it is, like your expectation of it being a certain way. And that by doing that, you can see it a different way. And maybe that's all it is. It's about seeing things differently. Second house certainly is about vision and it's about seeing things. So, yeah, this might be a time just to kind of let go of your preconceived ideas about how things should be and allow them to be whatever they're going to be. And everything gets worked out in the end anyway. Everything starts to pivot now and change as we lead up to the full moon on the 23rd, 24th. This is a full moon in Libra. This is in your eighth house sign. And this obviously balances out the equation with the sun exalted now in Aries, your second sign, Jupiter and sun together in your second sign, really highlighting this family, money, value, safety, security, all of these issues really to the fore essentially. But again, some unexpected news going on here as well from family maybe or from finances or something going on there. And again, in a positive way, more than likely. And now that Mars is moving into your sign, it means it's even more positive because on the full moon on the 23rd, 24th, Mars moves into Pisces. And it will therefore exchange with Jupiter and Aries. So there's this exchange between your ruler and Mars, first and second houses. That's seen as a positive exchange, that they're intimately connected to each other, helping each other out. There's this give and take that has to happen, of course, but there's this kind of situation that can help you out financially. The issue here, of course, is that Mars is conjunct Neptune and Rahu is here too, and Mars will conjunct Rahu in May. And Mars, therefore, isn't that clear about what it's doing or where it's going. And Mars, as your second and ninth lord in your first sign, though it drives you and it gives you the energy to do something, because it's conjunct Neptune, especially by the end of April, April 29th is the exact conjunction. And then in May, it conjuncts Rahu. Its energy is all over the place, and it might be a bit unclear about how to direct its energy. So you might not be clear about why you're doing what you're doing, for example. You might not be clear about what to do even, but you might have a sense that there's something that you need to do here that's important. And you might not be clear because of all the changes that are happening in April, because you might have set out in April thinking that this is the way it is and I'm going to do this. But by the end of April, it's completely different. Everything has changed now, and now it's this. Now I have to think about this again. And Mercury retrograde, as it continues through your sign until the day after the full moon on the 25th, will show a turnaround. Mercury in your sign, conjunct Rahu by exact degree, shows this shift that's happening and this turnaround. So you might have this complete turnaround and change of mind. Your partner might have a complete change of mind. Something's going on with your relationships, obviously, with all of these planets lined up in your first house, and then obviously implicating the seventh house. But again, while all of this is happening, all these planets either side in your second and 12th, it's very much about family relations and all of these things. So keep an open mind, I would say, throughout April. By the time Mercury stations to go direct again by the 25th, you can start to move forward with anything you've been thinking about with your partner, with any other in your home life, in any kind of situation, financially or otherwise. By the time it makes it into Aries again in May, and by May 10th, it's at least kind of like, okay, I know what to do now. I need to do this and I'm going to get on and do it. In May, it's going to be a lot more productive than it is in April. And here you can see Venus has moved into your second sign at this time. And so you got Venus, Jupiter, to finish out Jupiter's transit in Aries, your second sign with the sun exalted. There's some very beneficial things going on here as well. Even though Saturn continues to aspect and asks you to really, again, maybe let go of something, some expense that has to be removed, some even idea or ideal or ambition that has to be removed once and for all, for you to get clear about how you can move forward now with this new plan, this new action plan. And to be clear about this new action plan is one thing, but then to implement it is another, which really, again, doesn't really come until the end of the month into May. But ultimately, like I said, it's more positive, I would say. And by the 1st of May, and I'll talk about this, of course, more so in next month's forecast. By the 1st of May, Jupiter has moved into Taurus. So this is important because for you, it's the first time in a long, long time, Pisces, that Jupiter is not conjoined Saturn or aspected by Saturn or conjoined Rahu or aspected by Rahu. It's the first time in years since 2019 that it's not in that kind of situation. So that is something I want to just highlight on the horizon to give you a more sense of more that positive, that sunrise, on the horizon is coming up now. And in April, it almost feels like it has to kind of get really topsy-turvy for a while before you reach that sunrise. It's literally an eclipse after all. So before you reach that clarity and that sense of assurity and confidence and moving forward with your plans, it's kind of like everything has to get eclipsed for you to be able to see things differently. And if you approach April with that in mind, Pisces, I think you're going to be clearer about everything long term. Try not to get bogged down in the immediate time frame. Use the time instead to be really still and be open to the insights that are available, maybe even the revelation that's available. So Pisces, I hope that's been of help. I just want to say one more thing. I didn't really mention it too much. The full moon on the 23rd, 24th. It is a full moon in your 8th house, and it does show that you need to be open to changes in that respect as well because of the 8th house. But it is also a pivot point, a balancing point in order for you to get clear about all of these other issues that are happening in a very personal way, to kind of ask others for their opinions in another way, or just ask others or be with others and just relate to others more in a more intimate way so that you can balance out the second house indications here, which is very much me, mine kind of thing. and trying to figure it out for myself. While, you can probably benefit from engaging more with others during this full moon, this Libra full moon, because they'll have their own insights, they'll have their own issues, they'll have their own whatever to give you. And that will balance out all of these things that are happening in your sign and in your second sign, because there's just so much going on. It might be helpful to kind of get a different perspective during the full moon around the 23rd, 24th. So as I said, it is like a very complicated month. April, probably one of the most complicated in the year and for a long time, in fact. So as long as you're mindful of that going into it and knowing that there is that more positive astrology coming on the tail end of it, then you'll be able to navigate this with poise and with grace. So Pisces, I wish you all the best for the month ahead, and until next time.